watching as it started to move out of the station. The train was completely automated, with no one left on it as it went back to the battle to rescue more people. That was his ticket into that hellhole. So many jackets had been designed through the year, but it always came down to this one in the end. Maybe it was destiny or something. He ran along the roof parallel to the train as it built up speed, then hopped off the roof and onto the body of the train, grasping onto the roof and latching onto one of the rails up there as the train began to go faster and faster. He adjusted his grip, locking himself in with a belt so he could have his hands free as he got ready. Through the year. That's right. This was just over their 1-year anniversary. Only a single year of doing this, and how far they had come. He took the weapons out of his duffel bag and began to shove them into various spots on his body. The ammunition, his vest, the guns, his jacket, the cannabis under his coattails. They had made so many weapons through the years, but they kept those weapons at their hideout within Ishiyama High School, and if he wanted to get there in a reasonable amount of time he'd have to take a train. Unfortunately, Ishiyama High School was in the wrong direction. It would take another 10 minutes to get there if a train was leaving the station the second they arrived, and then another 15 to get from the school to the correct district's train station. That still wasn't even counting getting from the station to the fight. Finally, the last thing in the bag. The thing at the very bottom. A piece of shit that only a drunk could have called a sword. He unsheathed it slowly, checking the dull blade. It had been made from cheap wood and a pipe and could hardly carry an edge. But, it was the only sword he still had. Muramasa and Stain's original sword were at the school too. The only sword left, Yamato. They hadn't thought much about Yamato since they woke up. It had been shattered by their carelessness. Right after they told Kaminari about taking care of their swords too. Ironic. Yamato was gone. A rough thought as he stared at the piece of garbage he was stuck with instead. Would this do anything? Could he even really use it? They had sticks for weapons and cloth for armor, their own sloppy second swoosh. He fumbled with the sword as the winds above the speeding train picked up and he nearly dropped the thing. He quickly sheathed it to make sure he didn't repeat his mistakes, then focused ahead. The train began to slow as the station came into view, and with the station came crowds of people. The screams and cries were so loud they could hear it from there. Their gear was garbage, sure. But that was normal. Now, it was time to stop making excuses. This was the hard part. Izuku let go of the train and slid off, rolling out of his fall then breaking into a running. Nomu screamed as a shadow slipped through them, tearing them apart. Needles descended from the sky like rain. Gunshots split the night. The screams of the innocent were matched, then surpassed by the screams of the Nomus as an undying ghost crossed the city. A few people ran out of a building and across the street before a large monster smashed through the wall after them, roaring as its teeth gnashed and its eyes spun around, trying to focus on its prey. It locked back onto the civilians running and screams, its twisted smile growing as it lurched forward. Revenant didn't even bat an eye at that thing as he burst from the alley, snaking from his direct route for a quick detour. The Nomu didn't even notice him as a needle pierced the side of its head, giving it just a second to blink and turn right as Revenant plowed into it. His pace didn't even drop as they crashed into each other with Revenant kicking the needle into the Nomu's brain. Izuku pushed off the new corpse, pushing himself forward even faster and towards the heart of this catastrophe. He could still hear the resonating crashes as All Might and that villainess he'd seen earlier crashed into each other, their blows echoing across the city. Made it much easier to find them. Revenant stepped past the charging Nomu, spinning on his heel and planting a spare knife into the side of its skull. He barely slowed for even that, continuing to run towards the epicenter as the Nomu stuttered on for a few hundred feet before teetering out and crashing into the ground. He maintained that steady pace, slicing through everything in his way like a surgeon as he made his way over. Izuku used a variety of weapons from the classic needles he forged to the guns and knives he'd stolen through the year during a variety of gang fights. He didn't count how many they tore through by the time he got to the big fight itself. Revenant let the hero take in the information, his specialty, before Revenant did his. All Might had been reduced to his skeletal form and was moving slowly while the female villainess seemed to be at almost full pace. Almost. She was slower than All Might usually was in his buff form and was definitely slower than she had been on television. Sloppy moves. Sluggish reactions. Bad decisions. He knew exactly what was happening because it had happened during dozens of patrols to him. The villainess was starting to run out of energy. With that in mind, Revenant slowed down from their breakneck run and selected the only rifle they ever bothered to pick up, checking the clip before loading it in. It was time to get to work. Revenant kept eyes trained on his target while picking his next tool. They weren't doing a lot of damage so far, even with a rifle, so they'd try to tire her out for now instead of wasting time trying to go for big damage. It was time to stall while the skeleton made tracks. Speaking of which, I told you once, All Might. If you can't fight, get moving. I don't have time to babysit anyone. I can still fight. Who are you, again? Irrelevant. Revenant didn't waste time as the villainess recovered from the flashbang and charged back in. She was going for them, so it was time for that footwork they spent so long practicing. Shimura lunged off the ground, jumping into the air to build momentum then slamming both fists into the ground, trying to flatten this new person while Izuku calmly moved forward into and underneath her attack, moving in a straight line under her while she jumped. Her own attack created a shockwave that helped him dodge, pushing him further away from her and maintaining a good distance between them. Izuku kept his feet under him and drew a pistol, firing pot shots to continue harassing and drawing Shimura's attention. She tanked the bullets like insect bites, smiling once again as she turned and charged straight at him to deliver a barrage of punches. Revenant emptied the clip and threw the entire pistol at her face, nailing her in the eye right as she tried to throw her first punch. The gun hardly mattered, they had probably almost 100 pistols at this point, but they needed to stay alive to use them. That meant they had to squash her barrage. Shimura stepped down and started throwing punches wildly, blinking after taking an entire gun to the face to regain vision, but it hardly mattered. Her force was enough to hurt All Might with just her wild flailing, if you could even call that a barrage, so this wasn't going to be easy. Revenant grabbed his sword with both hands and stepped into his own parry, slamming his sword into the side of her arm to divert it while weaving his entire body to the same side, putting all of his weight into deflecting a single strike. He kept this weaving motion going, using the momentum to parry the next hit as he stepped back and forced her to try and chase him. When Shimura stepped forward, Izuku also stepped forward, minimizing the distance between them to mere inches. It was in this deadly distance that his light footwork really shined through, moving with Shimura's punches to negate any and every attack. Shimura would punch with her right hand and Izuku would move to her right side, moving past and outside of her punch while smacking her with his metal stick. Shimura would retract her right arm and he'd move in with her right arm, advancing while she retreated and moving around her body. Shimura's punches seemed to come out in an instant, but she couldn't react in an instant. He forced her to think about her attacks, making her body slow down to match the speed of her mind, while his body was speeding up to try and keep up with his mind. That was why he needed to ruin her first punches. When she was confident she wouldn't try to think about her punches, meaning she'd be going full speed. If he got hit by one of those, it was over, so he needed to break her confidence in those punches. So far she tried it 3 times and failed every single one, and he intended to keep it that way. If he didn't. Revenant felt the shockwave and gusts as this villainess's attacks punched through the air like bullets, only missing his body by a few inches. Those strikes would, at best, be a nice clean death for him. Her attacks were so strong that he'd prefer they killed him instantly, because if he survived the initial hit, it'd be a painful way to go, fading to black twice. But Revenant had no intention of dying twice. Revenant wasn't just surviving, he was going to live. He wasn't just going to endure this moron's barrage, he was going to fight back. Izuku lunged forward, tackling the woman to buy a second while dropping something on the ground. While the tackle didn't do shit except making his shoulder hurt, the villainess did take a step back to try and build distance, since he was too close to hit with a good punch. If she could get 2 or 3 feet between them, she had much better odds of actually landing a real punch since she wasn't giving up the barrage yet. Izuku stuck close though, advancing with her and keeping her attention fixed on him. He brought his head down, covered his ears, and performed another weak shoulder check as they moved back, keeping as close as possible while preparing for the blast. Shimura kept trying to build distance and punch him while he kept sliding underneath and between her attacks. Frustrated, and paying no mind to the thing he dropped, Shimura pulled back and ready to big punch to force the annoyance to either die or move backward. Pieing. Right as that thing he had dropped, another flashbang went off. His stalling tactics paid off, ending the barrage as Shimura grabbed her face again. Because she had been looking straight at him, she had almost a perfect view when the flash part went off. The bang was still as effective as ever, especially at such close distance. Izuku, alternatively, was facing the opposite direction so he couldn't see the flash and had the good sense to bring earplugs. He was using guns, after all, he didn't want to deafen himself. In addition to those earplugs, he had covered his ears with his hands, banking on how close he was to avoid any punches. Now that she was blinded again, she was probably going to start swinging wildly again. Revenant cut backward and took out a submachine gun, calmly sliding a clip in and emptying the entire thing into her before circling to the side. Shimura once again flailed, her enhanced senses betraying her and doing more damage than all of Izuku and Revenant's counters so far. She could at least feel the bullets and moved in the direction they came from, but she couldn't judge the distance correctly. He had moved back 20 feet then leapt to his left, but she only charged forward 10 and then started throwing everything she had into turning her surroundings into rubble. They weren't strong enough to beat this villainess. Hell, they couldn't even damage her. But she was strong and stupid enough to do both, and if they played this right. Shimura regained her senses, blinking and turning to look around. She dropped her guard as she tried to find her opponent, confused but confident that he wouldn't be able to hurt her because why it was so easy to throw sand in her eyes, blinding her once again and sending her back into a confused frenzy. Izuku weaved towards Shimura, stepping around and staying behind her with his parkour before latching onto her back and emptying another magazine into the base of her skull. Shimura screamed and flailed, trying to use her arms to dislodge him instead of slamming her back into the ground. The bullets might not pierce her skin, but they still had a lot of force, like a forceful flick to the head. It didn't do physical damage, but it was a great tactic for annoying someone. If he was lucky, she might get a concussion from all the hits she was taking to her head. However, after his career, he really wasn't banking on luck. Shimura spun this way and that, eventually throwing her assailant off like a bucking bronco. He landed by rolling to diffuse the force and build distance, then got his feet underneath himself, sliding to a stop. They were once again a good distance from each other as Shimura wiped her eyes again, smiling weakly. It looked fake, almost as if it was painted on. All Might, you said you could still fight. Why aren't you doing anything? Revenant glanced at their second big issue, the skeleton who seemed to stick around just to spite them. A hero can't run from conflict. You can't seriously think you're a hero right now. Revenant shook his head, standing up fully as he pretended to abandon all defense. This would lure the villain in and give them a chance for another counter. You've got to save yourself before you can save others to be a hero, dumbass. And you think you can beat her? She'll kill you in one hit. All Might made great points as the woman of the hour dived towards him. She was going for a grab this time, which was no good. Her grip strength could probably crush their head like a grape. Shimura moved forward with arms extended as if she was going to try and hug them, and with her strength, she probably could kill them with that. Still, the slippery snake didn't think death from overhugging was how he was going to go out. Shimura covered the distance between them rapidly, closing her arms together in a brutish attempt to try and hit him. Revenant also moved towards her, charging with a distinctive sway as they moved towards each other. At the last moment before impact, Revenant purposely let his feet slide out from under him and slipped underneath of the villainess's charge. Revenant spun back to his feet, grabbing his sword and dashing after the still charging villainess. Before she even had time to realize that she missed, Revenant's sword began to hammer the back of her skull, leading the assault with a thunderclap and bolt. He went full force on the attack while Shimura was unfocused, throwing dozens of swings into her head while she barely noticed. Like rain against a wildfire, something so tiny facing against something too vast to understand. But he wasn't trying to understand her. He wanted to win. Revenant paid careful attention to her legs as they swung their sword in every direction, hammering away at a single point like madmen. All fighting required a base, and most people's base started at the legs. He could predict her by her legs, by seeing what she wanted to do. Shimura squatted to give herself room to move, building up for a big attack as she tensed up. Her arms weren't tensed, so she was probably going for another tackle. He couldn't deflect those, so he'd be dodging. If he moved backward, he'd just get run over a split second later. That left the obvious and obscure answer. Shimura lurched backward, spinning and turning midair to try and catch the speedy bug who had been pestering her, but he wasn't a bug for nothing. Instead of diving to the side to avoid her, the rational and obvious choice, Izuku pressed even closer as she jumped and flipped over her, keeping his eyes and a gun trained on her as he jumped off. As she hurtled past him, Revenant took more potshots. When he was this close he could afford to aim for the head, at least, he justified that he could. Besides, a few more rounds to the dome from an SMG never hurt her, it seemed. Because Revenant was focused on shooting her in the face, Izuku kind of fucked up his landing, hitting the ground roughly and being forced to abandon the SMG to quickly correct his posture. He at least had a little time to get into position before Shimura came back, thanks to her own terrible attacking method. And while he had time, All Might, you said you could fight, so why are you doing nothing? Switch forms already and help. I can only throw 3 more punches. I don't have the energy to do my full body anymore. Then why aren't you running away, goddammit? Revenant took the piece of garbage back out, drawing the shit sword in an instant. In the same time it took him to draw his sword, that big bitch came right back for another attack. What the fuck? When was she gonna run out of energy? He couldn't complain though, he didn't have the time. Shimura went in for a clothesline, purposely stopping early so he couldn't get his parry off. She threw her arm forward, creating an enormous gust that threw him into the air and perfectly set up her next attack. Revenant couldn't touch the ground now, so he had no way to dodge her next attack. Revenant spun through the air for a moment before gravity took control again. This villainess was starting to think, and it only took a whole minute. Now this was getting dicey. Shimura lined up her next attack, that haymaker again. She got underneath him, ready to intercept his falling body and turn him into a red splatter. He hurtled through the air, spinning as he positioned himself for the last second. Shimura's fist hurtled forward as Izuku straightened his entire body out, both of his feet kicking her in the face before her fist could pulverize him. This one little attack, while doing practically no damage, moved Izuku out of the way of her punch and instead just launched him back up, riding the huge gales her punch created. As Izuku flew upward again, he decided to exchange gifts. She gave him this free air ride, so he'd give her something in return. He reached into a pocket and lobbed something at Shimura's feet as he flew backward and upwards. Shimura was at least ready for a flashbang this time. She wouldn't let him keep getting them off so easily, instead taking a fully defensive measure. She moved backward, away from him, and covered her face so she wouldn't get blinded by another flashbang. However, the random thing Izuku had thrown didn't do shit. It wasn't a grenade, after all, it was a rock. He couldn't just throw flashbangs all day, he'd run out of them in 5 minutes. So, he picked up a few other things like that to serve as mix-ups and keep her guessing. If she hadn't fallen for it, though, this would have been a lot harder. As much as it hurt to admit, they didn't have any good aerial options. They were at their weakest when they were in the air, so they had been trying to keep her away. Still, it was unlikely to work twice, so they'd need to think of a new plan going forward. Izuku rolled out of his fall, taking the landing a little rough but getting his feet on the ground and his sword at the ready pretty quickly. He could have kept shooting her with gunshell, he had more SMGs to replace the one he just lost but the bullets weren't doing anything. It was better to use the sword and keep deflecting attacks than waste ammunition to try and draw the aggro he already had. That was the exact reason this fight was so annoying. Izuku couldn't do any damage, he was just wasting time and letting Shimura tire herself out. But even if he couldn't do any damage to that musclehead, there was one person who could. Shimura snaked forward, moving in a serpentine pattern towards him. She zigzagged back and forth as she built momentum, ending in front of him with a leg raised as she tried to perform a sweeping kick and take his head off. Master! All Might screamed as he barreled forward with all the subtlety of a train wreck. Shimura completely abandoned her kick the second All Might began to move, even before he ruined his own surprise attack by shouting and moved into position at top speed. All Might threw a haymaker into the villainess's side, launching her backward, but it didn't land right. Her defenses came up before to block some of the attack and, while it did throw her a few hundred feet back, she landed safely with her feet underneath her, smiling through it all. Damn, it wasn't enough. All Might was stating the obvious, but that was a real worry here. All Might's hits were the only thing Izuku had that could do real damage to her, but All Might was quickly running out of those kinds of attacks. Would Shimura run out of energy before they did? No shit. What was with that shouting? Even I could have reacted to that. Revenant nitpicked, but it was clear that Shimura had been reserving her full power until now. Shimura had reacted before All Might started shouting, meaning that she was already keeping an eye on All Might at all times. It was like she was only fighting Revenant and Izuku at 50%, while All Might got to deal with 100%. Well, something like that. Izuku also noticed that she might have been taking so long to recover from attacks because she was keeping an eye on All Might. If All Might attacked her while she wasn't ready, she'd take a serious amount of damage. She was dumb, but she wasn't brain dead. She was aware of who could hurt her and would react accordingly. Sorry, shouting is not helping. You've got 2 punches left. Izuku loosened up, taking this moment to make sure he was in top condition while getting his kit ready again. Moving ammunition around so it was easy to grab since he had some open slots in his first positions. Swapping grenades around. Minor stuff while Shimura dramatically rose, wasting time and giving them some wiggle room to plan. Thank God that, while she wasn't brain dead, she was definitely pretty dumb. Yes, but that didn't feel good. I don't think I can take her down with only 2 more. Now All Might was giving useful feedback. It took a little patience, but the old guy got around to it eventually. Reventant did suspect that they'd run into this problem. It was why he wasn't relying on All Might. Maybe he should just have All Might throw his last 2 punches just to waste more of her energy before Izuku took control, but that might make things even harder. If All Might wasted any energy, like missing the punch or getting hit, this was going to get a lot harder. Things would be much easier if Revenant did the weakening and All Might did the finishing. Great. I'll try to keep her attention and weaken her. Stay ready. Izuku beating Shimura alone was like trying to chop a tree down with your bare hands, or a mosquito going against a lion. It could be done, it could theoretically be done, but it was nearly impossible. A better option was for the mosquito to tire the lion out, then let another lion kill the first. That was the plan Revenant had come up with. But that did mean he'd eventually have to rely on All Might, and that he'd be the one protecting All Might until then. Protecting him from the city-destroying woman who was still laughing maniacally. So the plan wasn't exactly perfect. Shimura laughed as she stood up, shaking her arm and checking it for any signs of injury. While she still wasn't saying any actual words, this did imply she was at least somewhat self-aware. She was making sure she could keep using the arm he hit. She blocked your attack with her arms and jumped backward, negating most of the force, and landed correctly. Next time you punch, try to hit her from. Izuku laid out a plan for All Might but was cut off as a thunderbolt crossed the distance in a flash, laughing as she went straight for All Might. Shit. All Might couldn't get hit, that dumbass could barely stand right now. Revenant got as close as he could, but he was still too slow to get between All Might and the villainess. If he could have, he would have stood between them to force her to go around him, buying another half a second and letting him start to divert her attention. Instead, he had to get her to stop without directly stopping her. Revenant didn't even have time to scowl as he grabbed something off his belt and chucked it at All Might, hitting the big oaf in the chest. He couldn't hit Shimura at full speed, but he could hit where she was going to go even if he did a little friendly fire. Run, now. All Might got the message as he took a dive backward, away from the object Revenant threw. Shimura seemed to appear out of thin air going for another haymaker, which was looking like her favorite punch. It was the one she always led with, no matter the situation, like when her target was already diving out of the way and the punch had no chance of actually landing. Her first big swing missed because All Might dived backward, forcing her to continue advancing to chase him. Because she was chasing him, Shimura didn't notice the object Revenant had thrown and walked right over it to continue punching. Blam. So the fragmentation grenade that she walked over got to hit her almost dead center, blowing up from underneath her with a loud bang and throwing her off her game. The fragments themselves were barely noticeable, doing no more damage than the bullets from before. The explosive did, however, take her by complete surprise, using Shimura's body as a meat shield to protect All Might from the blast. It disrupted her momentum and gave her another thing to be overly dramatic about while Izuku got into position and picked a new weapon to annoy her with. See, now he had a reason to keep lost SMG magazines. Before it was just something he did to test her defenses and harass her, testing her patience. Now, it could be used to get her attention away from Japan's #1 skeleton. When they first arrived, Shimura had All Might on the ropes and was probably about to finish the fight, but she had definitely stopped fighting All Might entirely the moment she got shot by him. If she continued, she would have won, but instead, she turned all her attention to him after just one attack that barely did any damage. Now, Shimura turned on her heel as the bullets pecked at her back, smiling eerily before charging in to do the same attack as before and focus on Izuku, the one who was pestering her with his SMG. She went in for the same haymaker that she'd just thrown at All Might, showing her inhumanity and rigidity. I thought you were thinking, but it looks like I was wrong. Revenant pulled out one of the toys he made a long time ago, scattering them on the ground in front of himself just to deter her. He didn't use a ton of them since he'd also be walking around here, but for someone stupid enough to charge in straight lines they could, in theory, be useful. In practice, however, Shimura crushed his caltrops underfoot with as big a smile as ever, lining up that haymaker she loved so much with his face. Hey, at least it was worth trying the caltrops. Izuku threw the SMG at her face instead of trying to reload the thing, blocking her line of sight and jumping behind her as she swung her fist down. It descended like a thunderbolt, so powerful that the winds it created lifted up all the caltrops and launched them into the distance, probably to accidentally get stepped on by the first responders. Yeah, those caltrops really weren't pulling their weight. Izuku drew his sword quickly, taking a few shots at the back of Shimura's head to keep her attention while he monologued specifically to All Might, trying to bring the big oaf up to speed on this villain. She might have been a Nomu, actually, just a very humanoid one. She was certainly dumb enough to be one. You just attacked the last thing that hit you without thinking. You look really scary, but that's only in one-on-one fights. If there were other people here, we'd mop the floor with your dumb ass. Revenant taunted, paying careful attention to her face to try and find any traces of a reaction. Just because they thought she wasn't sentient didn't mean she wasn't sentient. They had thought she was sentient until just a few seconds ago, after all. A pretty exploitable weakness, I think. Is that why you haven't been attacking us, flying guy? Revenant turned to the final big mystery of this thing, the one who'd been watching the entire time. All for One. Of course, he didn't say All for One's real villain name. He didn't want to prove that they knew each other. He'd admit it if he had to, but no reason to complicate things right now. Shimura was making this plenty complicated already. I've seen your attack. A lot of power and a big range. But you'd hit the girl if you attacked. I think she'd even attack you if you hit her, and after that, there's no reason we fight her. Hell, we might team up to take you down. It truly made no sense why All for One didn't just shoot the lot of them and be done with it. Therefore, something was holding him back, and unless it was some outside reason that they couldn't see from here, it was most likely to be that female Nomu. The other options were All Might, the person All for One had been trying to kill, and Revenant, who was currently doing what could be considered a massive betrayal as he attempted to stop All for One's plans. Yes, thinking it through, there had to be something about the female Nomu that was stopping All for One. How rushed your training of her must have been if she'd even attack you. How many exploits do you really have, Nomu? Revenant grinned as he pressed as close as possible to the Nomu, dancing on the knife's edge as he stuck as close as possible now. Punches split the night like thunder, but Izuku's minute form slipped through every crack as he really tore into Shimura. He had analyzed hundreds of quirks before, and this was no different. It was time to see what made this defective clock tick. High strength, high energy consumption. Slow reaction speed. Bad tactics. Hell, it's just like fighting All Might. Revenant casually threw the #1 hero under the bus with a smile as he dodged and countered another swing with his blade, getting to proper grips with her abilities. Shimura laughed as she tanked every hit, letting him try his best and fail spectacularly. Revenant might talk big, but there was one last problem. Her defense wasn't great, sure, but it was good enough as his weak sword strikes bounced off her skin like facing a wall with a fly swatter. To really beat her, he'd need to create an opening for All Might to get in and really do some big damage. To create that opening, he'd need to keep her attention shit she was going to grab. Evade. Evade. Revenant caught onto her switch in style very quickly and went full force to try and evade it. The problem with their style of dodging her barrage, being a few inches apart, was shown in full force by going so close to her, they had difficulty with almost any other type of attack. They were so close it was hard to see other attacks coming, and Revenant only saw this attack coming the second she started it. He couldn't start dodging before she attacked, this was purely a competition of speed. Luckily, he was Izuku Midoriya. He managed to hold onto All Might's leg even as the #1 hero was jumping through the city. Being hard to get rid of was basically his thing, and if you didn't believe that, just ask Bakugo about that quirkless shit he knew in middle school. Izuku countered Shimura's attempts to grab him by grabbing her first. So the plan wasn't exactly genius, but hey. Izuku grabbed Shimura from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist. This put him at a very awkward angle for her to try and grab, turning Shimura's body against her. Next up was the hard part though. From behind her, Izuku leaned back and straightened his legs, lifting her off the ground like he'd done a few times in judo class when he learned some illegal moves in class, specifically from Koichi. That punk had been his first real teacher back in judo class, even if he was just messing around at the start. Now, Koichi's dominating style was saving Izuku's ass. How the tables turned. Just like Koichi had done to Izuku and even taught the young vigilante to do, Izuku lifted Shimura up by her waist and then turned her midair so her shoulder was pointing to the ground, adjusting his grip to hold her by one leg and her neck for the best impact. This move, while being pretty effective at beating a normal person, was also totally illegal in real judo. It was made by Koichi after all. After turning her sideways midair but before she could start flailing around and hit him, Revenant took a deep breath and dropped no, slammed Shimura into his knee, pushing her down faster than gravity would pull her for maximum impact. This was the same move the monster had used to break that little rabbit way back when. How far they had come. Still, there were a few differences to the move the monster used. Instead of hitting the female Nomu in her back and risk breaking his leg, his knee dug in underneath her ribs. Instead of putting bone against bone, it became bone against soft flesh, well, bone against flesh. With this Nomu, even her skin was as hard as stone. But it had the intended effect. Shimura hadn't been ready for it and hadn't tensed her body, meaning he actually got to wind her by the sudden and unexpected impact. Sure, it didn't do any lasting damage, but it wasn't supposed to. It was set up for the next part. And from Koichi's guard break, Shino's throw. Revenant dropped the female Nomu to set up for the next attack, taking a step back as he grabbed her by the back of her head with his right arm and her left arm with his own left. He used his legs to guide her into position, forcing her to stand up so he could get better momentum for Shino's throw. Shino had demonstrated this throw a few times for them back when they were in the judo club, a move against a standing opponent for self-defense. It could be done from the front or the back, but supposedly, it was very dangerous. It was so dangerous Shino didn't let anyone in the club actually practice the move on a living person, but against a monster like Shimura, it was perfect. Revenant hooked his right leg in front of both of the female Nomus and pulled, sweeping her legs out from under her while leaning forward and shoving her head forward. They tilted forward and began to fall towards the ground, Revenant putting all of his weight into Shimura's skull as he slammed her face first into the ground. All of their combined weight and momentum as they fell crashed at once into Shimura's face. With her body swept back, she couldn't catch herself and had to take the entire blow with just her face. Even for someone without super strength, this attack had a lot of force behind it. A normal person probably would have had their skull split when they crashed into hard ground like that, and even the monster they were fighting was stunned for a second as she grabbed her face, doing something between a scream and a snarl from the pain. Shino might not have made that attack. He definitely wasn't the first person to perform it, but it really was a move that reflected him. Shino, the vice president of the Ishiyama Judo Club, had a high level of control and could grab almost anything. Grabbing someone by their head was easy for him, and he had enough skill to not kill whoever he hit with this no matter the situation. Alternatively, Koichi, the biggest delinquent in the judo club, created a move that could be used in almost any situation from behind your opponent. Hell, Koichi was so good at it he could pull it off from any angle. Their two different styles of fighting both had their benefits and drawbacks to make them great moves, but when put together. But that wasn't all they had. Revenant stepped around the female Nomu and gave her a soccer kick to the side of the head, flipping her over and sending her back a good few feet. They had learned from Dozensno, hundreds of people. Every criminal they ever beat contributed to their style. Izuku pulled out another pistol, since they had a few seconds before she got up, and started taking more shots at Shimura's head. Most of the rounds found some purchase even if they didn't actually break the skin, and it seemed to slow her down while drawing her attention. Gave him some time to go back and think over the plan, namely, to try and figure out an ending to this shitty plan. Create an opening for All Might to do a big punch and get the win. Get the opening by keeping her attention. But how would he get her attention in the first place though, let alone keep it when All Might got involved? Shimura had always been watching All Might, and it was why her movements were so slow right now. It seemed like she was always focused on All Might, ready in case he approached, so he needed to take that attention away from All Might. Did that mean he just needed to big damage like All Might? Her operating system wasn't entirely clear, and that was a problem. Izuku gritted his teeth as he slammed another clip into the pistol and kept pouring the bullets into her dome. He needed to be a bigger threat than All Might, which was frankly impossible. There had to be some other way to get her attention. But how? All Might, I missed the first minutes of this fight. How did you two first engage? Revenant cried for details as he ditched the fourth magazine, dropping it and punting it out of the air with a soccer kick and whacking Shimura in the arm with it. Damn, he was good. All for One brought her out with the other Nomus. She caught my attack against that villainous scum, and then we started fighting. She caught an attack. Revenant did a double take. This female Nomu hadn't caught a single attack so far, and she had only blocked once. She had no defense to speak of, but she defends someone else. Maybe there was more than one way to get her to fight seriously. Shimura rose, shaking it off as she powered through the tears. Crying was a natural reaction to getting hit in the nose, and that throw had done a bit of damage to her nose. How rude. Shimura then smiled through it as she faced her attacker, ready to go again. Revenant raised his gun towards All for One and pressed down on the attack, emptying the clip in seconds by using both hands. Instead of squeezing the trigger with his right hand, the hand gripping the gun and the one normally used to fire, he put his left index in the trigger guard and moved as quickly as possible to quickly but inaccurately shoot all the bullets at once. Shimura's reaction was instantaneous, breaking her heroic pose to quickly slide between Izuku and All for One and body block the bullets. Bullets that, as far as everyone present knew, wouldn't do shit to the world's #1 villain. Revenant smiled as he dropped the clip, leaning forward slightly with enthusiasm as he slipped another clip in. Gotcha. No one realized the ramifications of what Izuku had just done, specifically because All for One already knew it was a weak point for Shimura and had been waiting to see if anyone would notice. Shimura had orders to block any attack that would hit him when he didn't dodge, and even he wasn't fast enough to dodge gunfire. She had accidentally taken this as the signal to move and block the attacks. That order, combined with her order to hit anyone who attacked her, made sure that she'd fight anyone who attacked All for One or her. It did, however, have a few flaws. They were intentional since, after all, All Might would never or could never exploit them. The problem, or on the other hand what made this interesting, was that this development didn't change anything. Knowing that Shimura would block any attack didn't change the situation because he was still 50 feet in the air, firmly out of reach of All Might because he wasn't stupid. This meant that only Izuku could attack him and get Shimura's attention, but Shimura couldn't avoid his normal attacks anyway. Attacking All for One did the same thing as attacking Shimura directly but with more steps and fewer results. On top of that, Izuku still couldn't do enough damage to actually hurt Shimura, so attacking All for One or Shimura didn't seem to make a difference. So why was Izuku so happy about this development? All for One checked his list again. Everything was done, and there was nothing more to do. He could leave, but there was also literally no harm in sticking around. The camera he had brought would be recording this so he could watch it later, regardless of if he went down or not. Still, this could be interesting. He leaned back in the air, as if he was sitting in his favorite armchair, and watched to see how this all played out. Instead of pressing down on this exploit and using it again, Izuku took in the information and started thinking of a route through this mess. Planning through her currently known weak points, his strengths, and the current situation to bring it all together and turn this mess into a victory. They had a lot of work ahead, a lot of very, very hard work ahead, but they could probably do it. They could definitely do it. He figured it out. Uh-oh. Revenant already knew the plan. He was technically the same person as the one who thought of it, but he absolutely hated it. You really are insane, aren't you? The voice talking in my head thinks I'm crazy. Sheesh, next the rain is gonna start thinking it's cloudy. Izuku laughed, thinking it through and cementing the plan as Shimura stopped overacting and started charging forward again, ready to try and turn them into paste. You with me? Revenant sighed, shaking his head as he thought through this mess. Unfortunately, let's do this. Chapter end notes. Yo yo yiggity child eating yo. Bet you didn't accept the reference to the Ishiyama Judo Club in this chapter, and I'll double down that no one even remembered Koichi and Shino until now. For anyone who wanted to figure out who those two were, chapter 67 to 70, the training arc. Have fun. Still, it's all coming together. Next chapter's the end of this big fight, and hopefully that won't take as long as this did. Syncing up the music and planning the action took a lot longer than I thought it would, might be. It took so long because, if you couldn't tell by Koichi and Shino, I've been a little introspective and reread the series to try and plan out what's coming up next. I've done a lot of setup and I'm finally getting to go through a lot of payoffs, so hopefully it's not too cringy. Here's hoping. Izuku's theories on Shimura and AFO were fun to write, especially when neither one is entirely true. Hope that, while trying to make this final fight seem cool, I can keep the characters true to themselves. You might even be able to predict one of Shimura's orders, limitations that AFO put in. Still, just a fun rondo fact cause I wanted to mention it. Most of the time, when writing chapters, I put music on in the background to get me into the headspace for the mood. When writing big fights like this, however, I put on S-rank plays of DMC5 or MGR, Revengeance in the background. It already comes with fighting music, it has cool fighting sounds to motivate me, and if I want some inspiration I can just alt-tab and watch some of that. Which might have contributed to the delay a little bit. Big oof. Still, it's been a blast writing this. I, at first, had a lot of drafts because I wanted this to be perfect. It is the finale, after all. But now I've realized that, once again, I'm a dumbass and if I keep trying to improve it I'll never release the thing. So here it is, hope you enjoyed it and that the fights made sense, and feel free to message me if any parts were too confusing so I can fix them. Until next time, adios. Chapter 157, The Ronin, Origin. Chapter Summary. A wandering samurai who had no lord or master. A blade with no handle. A sword unsheathable. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. A leaf in a hurricane, that's what it was like. It had been bugging Izuku's mind for a while, but that was definitely what this was like. Revenant used another pistol on the monster, snaking and weaving around Shimura's to avoid awesome blows that would tear him apart in a single hit. Shimura kept advancing while Izuku kept retreating and pouring bullets into her, as little as it was doing. It didn't matter how pathetic it seemed, he needed to get the setup done for later. As much as that female Nomu could kill them in a single hit, she couldn't get that single hit. A leaf in a hurricane was surrounded by forces that could tear buildings apart but remain fine by floating through the chaos. Their attacks had been done before. A barrage of punches against weaving steps, countered by a stream of bullets being completely ignored. If one was a leaf in a hurricane, the other was a forest against the breeze. By simply existing, the female Nomu crushed the breeze without even trying. It was this dynamic that created the current mess they were stuck in. While it was completely obvious that Izuku couldn't do a thing to Shimura and that he'd need All Might to finish off Shimura, and it had been stated a dozen times that the problem with this was getting All Might to land that punch. Shimura had her eyes on All Might and, if he got close, her attention would shift to him instead of Izuku. All Might was, after all, a real threat while all Izuku could do was mildly annoy Shimura. And all of them knew that. Izuku had to get Shimura's attention, which was easy enough. He'd already got her attention, judging by the hook Shimura just threw that almost launched his head like a baseball. That was the easy part, though. Next, he had to find some way to keep her attention while All Might approached, and that meant he'd have to understand what got her full attention. That full attention was the first big problem. Revenant stepped in, grabbing her by the cape to lift her off center then throwing a spinning back kick her way, breaking up the exchange of punches and bullets by building some distance while setting up some new attacks for both of them. Shimura wasn't hurt by the kick, she wasn't even fazed. But she took this opportunity to build distance and, the important thing, she wasn't looking at Izuku. Every time Shimura was knocked back or down, she did the same thing. Shimura's attention was fixed instead on All Might, showing that she was aware of who was the real threat here. She was content to play with the boy, but she was here for the hero. But there wasn't just one hero here. Revenant took advantage of her attention being diverted to experiment with their style, throwing the first smoke grenade of the fight. It bounced along the ground as Revenant slowly advanced, breaking the line of sight and changing the situation. There were a few other problems with this terrible plan. This location was shit. The monster's attention switched onto the smoke that blocked her vision, scanning for only a second before trying to solve the problem. With a single swing of her arm, the female Nomu cleared the smoke away and began to advance back towards where she thought Revenant was. But, instead of seeing her opponent in front of her, all she saw was a small gray object with a pin tossed carelessly beside it. Pieing. The hidden flashbang went off without a hitch, but Izuku was starting to run out of them. He was starting to run out of a lot of things, and he really blamed this location. They were fighting in a huge crater of what had once been a city, with no real cover or defense. His parkour was pointless in such a vast open place, forcing him to fight in a straightforward manner that didn't suit how weak he was. His mobility and attacking pattern came from his environment, but here, he'd just have to make a better environment himself. That monster grabbed her face, completely unprepared once again and completely blindsided. This was one of the ideal situations for All Might to come in and attack her. If it wasn't for the flailing. After being struck by the grenade, Shimura flailed, moving around quickly as she tried to destroy everything nearby. This erratic movement was great for tiring her out, but it basically sealed the deal on All Might's inability to help. So, instead of trying to use it offensively, Izuku was using his weapons and attacks defensively. He watched her attack and flail from his position, beyond where the smoke grenade had ever been. If she was focused on him she would have seen that, instead of being inside the smoke, he had chosen to walk around it to the opposite side of All Might. Because her attention was on All Might in the smoke, however, she had missed such an obvious detail as a guy casually walking beside her. Because he started so close to her, Shimura's rampage completely missed him as she assumed that Izuku was somewhere in the smoke or ahead of her, buying him time to keep planning in his head while Shimura demonstrated exactly how many ways she'd kill him if and when she finally got a hit off on him. Another shuffle and restock of his items, noting the worrying number of flashbangs and the overabundance of worthless smoke bombs. He was also worried about his now dwindling stock of SMG magazines since that was the guns he'd been using the most. He at least had a lot of pistols and pistol ammo, but he was more worried about running out of his most effective tools. Izuku took what must have been the 50th time to rethink the plan. Get Shimura's attention, keep Shimura's attention, and then. The third step, All Might's big punch. Victory was a 3-step plan, a plan that he went over and over so much he was digging a metaphorical trench. However, so far, he only went into the first 2 steps because that second step was a massive problem. However, there was a third step, and that also had a huge problem. The crater they were fighting in wasn't made by a meteor or something, it was made by All Might, all for one, and Shimura going full force. To boost this, Izuku had been a fan of All Might for a long time and had seen a fair share of All Might's big punches. If All Might went for a full force punch while Izuku was standing nearby, that leaf in the hurricane was going to become a leaf crashing into the sun. So, as Shimura's eyes refocused and she took in the scenery, Izuku summarized the plan. He had to get Shimura's attention and focus, so that Shimura didn't attack and finish off All Might. He had to keep Shimura's attention and focus so that All Might could approach and throw his big punch. Lastly, and most importantly, the punch itself. Izuku had to make sure he survived the thing by getting out of the way. Yes, he had to hold Shimura's attention, making sure that she was focused on him. While he got far enough away to survive All Might's punch, Izuku had to attack Shimura and get all of her attention, while he also had to stay far away from her so he didn't get launched into orbit. With guns that could have been toys, with a sword that was as effective as a plastic bat, he had to do all of this. So, the plan was pretty simple and straightforward. What could possibly go wrong when everything was already going wrong? Shimura was done recovering in the time it took Izuku to really realize just how impossible his goal was, and both were ready to keep on going for better or for worse. When Shimura's sight began to return, her tirade slowed down as she took in the world around her. She regained sight of All Might, saw that he wasn't attacking her, then moved on to Izuku. Revenant came out swinging, taking the initiative as Izuku finished his planning and detail work. Izuku was good at thinking things through, yes, but Revenant was born for combat. Logic backed by emotion, not abandoning emotion or being led by it. Revenant brought the garbage sword in from every angle imaginable, for once taking the initiative and putting Shimura on the back foot as he whipped his weapon around as if it was a real blade. As he advanced, the sharpened and shattered point glittered in the moonlight with every swing, the blade dancing from every angle to press on the attack. Shimura was pushed to her feet by a stinging strike that took her upside the head, disorientating her. It felt more like a slap than a real attack, merely knocking her back. She took a step back, ready to go on the attack. And took another strike to the face. The broken blade scratched across her face, flying towards her eye as the vigilante now confidently walked forward. His sheer bravado pressed her back with utter confidence as he got used to the reach of his blade, taking control as he both disrupted her rhythm and started to hammer out his own. Shimura was ready for the third strike, taking it to the side of the head like it wasn't there. She got her feet underneath her, smiling through the attack as it bounced off her skull. In an instant Revenant's leg came up, shooting up like a rifle as he kicked her in the jaw. His foot rose to 5.5 feet off the ground in a second, knocking the female Nomu slightly into the air and back another half step, disrupting her stance and sending her stumbling. If Shimura used her super strength she could easily escape the situation, fleeing with a single jump. She kept an eye on All Might, who still wasn't approaching, and instead endured the barrage. She'd save her energy for him, so instead, she just had to endure these weak hits. But she wasn't just a punching bag, she'd hit back. Revenant saw a punch coming and walked into her, grabbing her face with his left arm and hooking her legs with his left leg. His leg pulled, his arm pushed, and Shimura's punch was disrupted as she was thrown off center. She still did the punch, blowing the vigilante back, but she knocked herself deeper into the ground. This wasn't good, All Might could attack her, so Shimura immediately rose off the ground with a large leap and took to the air, floating there while she kept an eye on All Might. All Might still hadn't approached, so she was still fine. She'd just wait until All Might attacked and finish this quickly, stopping him from doing any real damage and securing her own victory. Shimura quickly checked herself and EUP, for as dramatic as the vigilante had been, she was still completely unharmed. A little confused, but still uninjured. It was like fighting a baby, she had to be careful not to break him. Shimura smiled as she began to descend, ready to wrap this all up as the vigilante began to take a few more pot shots at her. Izuku used the SMG because he had 2 magazines left, so he might as well get it over with and run out of ammunition while he still remembered that he only had 2 clips. He had a lot of things to remember and 2 little clips weren't very high on his priority list tonight. Still, when you were mag dumping an Uzi, 2 clips went pretty fast. 8 seconds in total counting the reload, shooting at a human balloon that was slowly drifting down in the breeze. Just to end it all, Izuku lobbed the Uzi at Shimura too, because at this point it really didn't matter. The gun bounced off her leg, doing as much as everything else hard so far. Fuck all. Are you even feeling any of this? Izuku patted himself down, keeping an eye on Shimura as he took out a pistol and continued to fire shots at the villainess. Shimura, feeling a little generous, smiled as she raised a single hand and held her index and thumb just a tad apart. Great, so she was sentient, and a comedian at that. Just what they needed. Glad we're both enjoying this. Izuku shook his head as he dropped the clip, punting it in the vague direction of Shimura and missing by a mile. Least he tried. Shimura launched herself the rest of the way through the air straight at him like she was swimming through it, combining float with super strength, and they collided once more time, re-entering the seemingly never-ending fight. He was stuck in a midway, bouncing aimlessly with no good start. How did one start? How did one person get into the flow of the finale? They were having plenty of time just bouncing off each other, but it was aimless actions. Neither was really making headway on winning or losing, instead, just bouncing off each other. A ball bouncing off a wall. The wall didn't scuff the ball, and the ball couldn't budge the wall. But by this point they had made well, the weak had made so many little comparisons so far but so little progress. He didn't need any more comparisons and metaphors, they needed to get moving. Izuku took out one last breath out, weaving through Shimura's punches with grace and ease to get behind her. Shimura spun to turn around and face her speedy opponent, but he was waiting for her. Shimura turned, already punching, but it was sidestepped as the Ronin slipped the punch and grabbed her, lifting her with the momentum from her own punch and flipping her, then sending her rolling backward with a kick for spacing. All Might, once you see an opening, go for it. Shimura's attention snapped up as now she sprung into a defensive posture instead of her previous method with long dramatic pauses between getting hit and standing up, somersaulting backward and assuming a real guard. I understand. And no pussyfooting this time. Revenant selected the final items. This was gonna hurt. I want you to go full force. I'll worry about me, but you're the only one who can take this villainess down. Understand. All Might didn't answer immediately, showing that he really was thinking about this and understanding it. This was difficult for him, something that couldn't be done at the drop of a hat. Still, the number one hero smiled through as he refocused and regained his bearings. Don't worry, sir. Give me the opportunity and I'll take the win. Sir, why's everyone think I'm older than them? Is it the sass? Ronin made some more useless commentary as he got into the winning combination. First up, acquiring that Senshin Wall's attention. Simple enough, and there were a variety of ways to do it, but Ronin wanted to control her position. He wanted to set up and a free attack, and that meant exploiting Shimura's bad programming, and like most exploits, it took an indirect approach. Ronin turned his gunfire away from the wall that wasn't taking a lick of damage for all his effort and instead pointed a pistol at All For One and let him have it. Ronin fired 8 shots in quick succession with a tight focus, aiming center mass at the villain. Shimura's bad programming showed now. If she was smarter, she'd know that normal gunfire wouldn't do shit to the number one villain and there was no need to intervene. However, if she was smarter she wouldn't have been fighting for this long, so, naturally, she stopped trying to attack Ronin and switched priorities, going full force as she placed herself in the path between the bullets and All For One. She didn't see the attack coming when Ronin pointed the gun at All For One. She only reacted once he fired, once an attack actually started. If she was thinking and actively protecting All For One, she'd go full force and stop Ronin from ever pointing the gun at All For One. Instead, she went full force and moved hundreds of feet in an instant to stop the bullets with her body. She moved to a predictable path, standing in a line between Ronin and All For One as she tanked the 8 shots with ease. The bullets were still doing no damage, but instead of getting her attention, they now served as set up an area control to force Shimura to move. Ronin ran straight in, dropping the pistol to the side as he grabbed something on his hip and something from his jacket, ditching the pin in advance. The shitty sword might have been a dull piece of garbage, but he'd put all of his faith in it. In a nameless blade, dull and broken. Thunder breathing. Shimura finished overacting, smiling dramatically as she stared at All Might. She didn't even pay attention to him. Still, for all his effort, for all his planning and combinations, Shimura barely registered him. He couldn't take her down, and they both knew it. Even if he did everything perfectly, he was still so far from victory on his own. First form. Ronin's steps were quick as moved, swinging his right arm to build up momentum while his left held fast to the shitty sheath. It was still bumpy, just a piece of wood he found. He barely laminated the thing, showing just how inexperienced he'd been. How inexperienced he was. To charge in with complete faith in a piece of shit. How childish. Thunder. Shimura's eyes slid from All Might to the little gnat, buzzing towards her. He had been running for 3 seconds, covering over 100 feet in that time. How cute. Clap. Shimura seemed to flicker as she automatically attacked back, move the rest of the distance between them in an instant. She was going for another barrage of punches. Perfect. And the pin in the grenade had already been pulled for an early detonation as Ronin lobbed the flashbang ahead in a straight line, where he'd known Shimura was going to go to attack him. She moved in a straight, predictable line towards him, so he knew where to aim to hit her. Pieing. The flashbang bounced once before going off just underneath Ronin, rattling his ears as the vigilante didn't even try to evade it. Both Ronin and Shimura flinched slightly from the nuisance but powered through for their respective attacks. They were both running full tilt for this final exchange, it'd be quite difficult to dodge at this point. Shimura planted her legs, smiling as she pulled back both arms to go in for the attack. Ronin wasn't sure if she'd go full force or not, but it hardly mattered. Getting hit by 30% of a truck would probably kill him just as well as the full 100. Ronin, however, kept with his unexpected streak and continued to keep his feet unplanted, completely abandoning traditional style as he literally ran into her, jumping off the ground and running up her, pressing off her leg and jumping off her shoulder to entirely evade the barrage by switching to an unorthodox angle. He kicked off her body and hung above her, using her as a diving board to get 4 extra feet into the air. Ronin's left hand tore the sheath of his sword backward, lobbing it behind him as he completely abandoned it to focus entirely on this single strike. His right hand yanked the blade out and up, using his shoulders to pull sheath and sword apart before raising the sword as high as it could go for his big attack. Shimura's reaction to this development was slow. While both Ronin and Shimura got blasted by the flashbang, only Shimura got to see the flash part, slowing her reaction just a touch. Shimura soaked in what Ronin had done, barely thinking. She had no plan of changing her plan, readjusting for her barrage to hit him once he came down. He'd hit her, she'd hit him, then she'd win. Simple. Ronin floated above Shimura for just a moment, suspended midair before giving into gravity and coming back down to crash into her. He breathed in slowly as his arm swung, bringing the sword down to hammer into Shimura. Shimura, in turn, stepped back slightly and pulled back an arm, ready to counter with a punch. Ronin dropped his entire body onto Shimura, using her as grounding while he brought the sword down into the side to parry Shimura's first punch. Blade met arm as Ronin put every muscle and force he could muster into properly blocking a single attack, trying his very damnedest to just win a single one of these confrontations. The already broken sword chipped off a bit more metal as it struggled against Shimura's arm, creating a shower of sparks as if steel met steel. Her skin and muscles were too hard to be beaten with the sword, no matter what angle he came in from. Even with his fancy parkour and tricks to get this close, his sword just couldn't find purchase on her body, but there was a body part that few defenses could protect adequately. Ronin's cheap blade barely diverted Shimura's arm, diffusing the punch with all of his efforts. Left him overextended. Ronin was standing atop his opponent, arms fully splayed down with his sword pressed against a limb, a not vital area, while Shimura was lining up her next punch because she had 2 arms and didn't really need to worry about overextending. Ronin finished breathing in as he began to reel final attack, taking in his position. He was atop Shimura with no defenses between him and his opponent both ways. Even Shimura, for all her super speed, couldn't dodge the next attack at this distance. He couldn't maneuver if he had nothing to push off of. The next attack was bound to land, but whose attack it would be remained to be seen. Ronin's left arm snapped forward as Shimura's right arm began to rocket towards him, Ronin grabbing Shimura by the head to help him aim his final attack. His right arm kept hold of the sword, pointing the shattered and sharpened tip straight towards the only part of Shimura's body he could guarantee a good hit on. The 2 arms moved towards their targets, Shimura's pure speed and power against Ronin's sword and tactics. Ronin pulled himself forward to her as he put his body behind the final strike. Shimura moved completely by instinct, still having trouble seeing what was happening. This was only 2 seconds after the flashbang went off and so everything was a hazy blur. She saw a vague shape above her, attacked it once, and missed. She brought her second arm up for another punch, completely unaware of the sharp fragment of metal before her until it pierced the soft flesh of her left eye. Ronin breathed out as he put everything he had into a single sword stroke, going for the kill as he rammed the shard of metal into Shimura's skull, stopping her attack dead with his own power. Shimura stumbled backward for a moment in real pain, screaming. Then their eyes met. There were no more smiles from the Nomu as it glared at him, blinded by the pain and the flashbang. It could barely think before but after the pain. A trick of blood ran down Shimura's face as she locked onto him before she got serious, throwing a single serious full-force punch. She could only hear the ringing of her own ears as her fist tore through the air before it slammed into the opponent. The net used his legs to jump off of her, trying to block the attack with his left arm, but it punched through such weak attempts like tissue paper and hammering into him. Her ears only heard ringing, her eye was blurry from the flash but she could still see his face as the mask fell away. Izuku Midoriya smiled as death rocketed towards him. He had been conscious for only an hour since his left dance with the devil, but he was still smiling as the punch rocketed towards him. No one could hear him, hell, he couldn't even hear him, but he still said it. He was feeling egotistical. Got you. He had dealt a single blow to her. For all of her power, for all of what All Might couldn't do, he hurt her. A single injury across her face, just one tiny blow he had dealt to a god. It made him smile even wider before her punch fucking launched him. Ronin jumped back and put up his left arm, but at this point all he could do was try to cushion the blow as Shimura snarled, stepping into the punch and hammering him with the might of her real strength. His measly defenses could barely be accounted for as she powered through everything, snapping his left arm like a twig before sending him flying down the street, skipping him across the ground like a stone across a lake with a single punch. But something felt wrong. It was like she couldn't put her full force into the punch like she was holding herself back. But why would she hold herself back? Oh, Shimura launched him with a single punch. It was as if his body was on fire as his ribs caved in as his body spun, but he still got to see that last glorious moment before he crashed. The flashbang hadn't just been to blur Shimura's eyes. It had also been to take out her hearing since some oaf couldn't help screaming every time he punched. Shimura, because of bad programming, pain, or infuriation, had entirely focused on Ronin and completely missed the second figure behind him, a lanky blonde man rushing in. All Might used one usage of his power on his legs to rapidly close the distance, keeping in his heart the words of his unknown aide. Don't worry about me. Only you can take her down. It was those words that made All Might look past the hero who had come to his aid, who had prepared himself to take the full brunt of Shimura's no, of this Nomu's punch, just to give All Might an opening. He couldn't squander this. His master's words echoed in his head as he moved in, planting feet as his arm buffed up and he stepped into the final attack. The hero was launched into the distance behind him, giving All Might the opening he needed as his own fist began to rocket towards this insult to his master's face. This power has been entrusted to the next generation by many people, praying that it would work for the good of all. United, All Might's foot hit the ground with enough force to shatter even more of it as he leaned into the punch. That all their hopes would become one. States of. All Might screamed his lungs out as his body pivoted on his hips, his shoulders twisting as his right swung forward with enough force to decimate buildings, turning the force of this Nomu's last punch against itself. Even the sacrifice of that lone hero would be put into the final punch of All Might's career. It's your turn now. Do your best. Nana blinked, her eyes trying to refocus. Where was she? What was happening? Toshinori. Sme. The impact of the punch alone created a tornado around the area as his strike reversed all of the Nomu's momentum and hammered her into the ground, devastating the nearby surroundings with massive gusts that made the punches of earlier look like slaps. Buildings were torn from the ground, streetlights were ripped up like grass, cars were crushed and scattered like toys by the force of a single almighty punch that traveled with the force of 8. No, 9 heroes. And then it struck the ground, burying the female Nomu in the ground and blasting everything with the force of an earthquake, creating a new crater in the midst of the city as the roads were shattered. The foundations of buildings imploded, the ground and heavens shook, and then all was silent. A moment of peace as All Might. No, Toshinori stood alone. The only thing left standing from the fight. He couldn't feel one for all anymore. He used it all for a single attack, to take down her. Toshinori rose to his full height, looking down at the female Nomu who was stuck, embedded inside the ground beneath him. She was still breathing but seemed unconscious by her eyes. Open but seeing nothing. Well, maybe one was seeing something, but her left eye definitely wasn't. That nameless hero got her good. All Might couldn't tell what happened to that man from his position. He could only hope that hero made it out safely, having survived a full-strength punch from the Nomu. It wasn't likely, but he could still hope. Not bad, yes, not bad at all. Someone was clapping. Toshinori froze as if blood had turned to ice. He had been hoping that All for One had gotten caught in the final attack and injured, that they both had gone down, but All for One was no longer flying, instead calmly standing in his best suit amidst the crater. He really did get the worst of the attack since he had been flying, having rubble and debris slam into him while the winds buffeted him about, but he was still the most durable person here. The injuries might have made him approach his limits, but he wasn't done yet. All for One instead applauded the efforts of All Might. He could detect status and saw that Shimura's limiter had kicked in, preventing her from going full force and turning Midoriya into a splatter amidst the tornado, otherwise he'd go full force and kill everyone here right now. But he could respect the work of his son. Midoriya worked very hard to get this far, and to undo that now would be rude. He had lost nothing from this. Nanamu was supposed to die anyway, so her loss was expected. All Might had lost one for all and was so bad at using it that his guidance would probably make the next user even worse, so again, no harm in keeping him alive. Even now, with all his plans diverted, he won. His son had grown so much. It was amazing. That Bueno, that vigilante was the one All for One applauded now with genuine respect, not the bumbling idiot who stood before him, having used all of his power to take down the mini-boss. It also proved that, for all the time One for All had wasted trying to gain power, it had been for nothing. If All Might couldn't even beat some Nomu All for One slapped together while testing a new design, One for All could probably never be a real threat to them. Still, All for One was finished, so it was time to go. He was now confident that no hero in Japan could pose a real threat to him no matter how many showed up, but he had fulfilled his every desire with this place. What more could he want to do? Well, there was one thing. It's truly amazing, I don't think I've ever seen Shimura win a fight. All for One had a great time pissing off All Might one last time, laughing as he clapped. She lost to me, she tied you, she lost to whoever interrupted this, and then she rematched and lost to you. How on earth was anyone stupid enough to give her one for all? Quote. All for One. All Might snarled as he turned, but he had no more power and they both damn well knew it. He was stuck watching as All for One began to float into the air, still smiling. He'd exit through the air. Flying quirks were rare, but this body had been equipped with some of the best for his exit. To be honest, he was surprised he needed to leave. He thought this body would have been destroyed in All Might's final attack, negating the need to leave, but it had just a bit more than All Might had managed to give out. He was teetering at the edge though. All for One would have used the teleportation quirk from earlier that he used to bring the League to him, homesickness, but its range was too short and he couldn't teleport himself through it. That was its biggest flaw, in the number one villain's opinion, but it still had its uses. You did a good job, All Might, but, pang. Pang, 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 pang. All for One was cut off by a flurry of bullets that flew past him, every single shot missing by a mile. Both All for One and All Might turned, looking in the direction of whoever fired this despite both knowing who it probably was but still surprised. So his left arm was fucking broken. That was a fun start. His fingers were dislocated and snapped like twigs, pointing in multiple directions as his arm hung limply by his side. Even the motion of the wind made his fingers hurt. His forearm, the spot where he was hit, was twisted and snapped around the middle with bones puncturing through the flesh. His elbow was definitely dislocated to boot because at this point, why not? Then his shoulder. On top of all that, his shoulder. Dislocated and broken to boot, just like forearm and hand. Still, his bicep was pretty fine. It seemed instead of breaking, it just pulled his shoulder out of place and damaged at least one of the other bones in its place. Lucky him. Still, Ronin powered through all of that, dropping the clip on the ground and messily reloading by slamming the gun into the top of a clip, then pressing it against his body to fully wedge the clip in there. He took more shots as he trudged forward, powering through the injuries. When you got enough of them, the pain sort of started canceling itself out. Plus, he was used to this. He had lived like this for 10 years, and this used to be his normal. Those years of constant injury forced him to grit his teeth and bear with it, and he wasn't done gritting his teeth yet. They were cut off by the rising bile and blood in their throat, but Ronin just turned and spit out and continued on. All for One. Should you really be moving in that state? All for One took in their shattered form and gestured to them with his shooting arm while stating the obvious. They probably should give up now. It'd be so easy to stop trying to think and pass out. But heroes didn't make easy decisions, so Ronin forced himself to remain conscious a little longer. His gaze naturally flicked to All Might, who still needed help, before returning to All for One with renewed vigor beyond his body. I should keep moving until I'm done. Revenant analyzed the scenario and gave the orders. If Ronin willed it, Revenant would see them through. What were a few more injuries at this point anyway? Ronin lurched forward unsteadily into a quivering charge, ditching the pistol entirely as he grabbed his next weapon from underneath his coat. It was a lot larger than a pistol but harder to load, so he didn't want to use it in the long drawn-out fight against Chimera, but here. He wasn't going to last long enough to reload it, so fuck it. Ronin tried to raise his new weapon as his right leg gave out from underneath him, his ankle creating a loud snap as he tumbled to the ground. He rolled twice and screamed, not from pain but to keep himself focused as he forced his rolling to stop and dragged his next weapon up. A shotgun, a weapon that was very good if it could hit. He wasn't sure if the pellets would even pierce Chimera's skin, but at this point, he didn't have a reason not to try against All for One. His eyes shuddered as he squeezed the trigger, being thrown up and back slightly by the kickback as he got a leg underneath of himself, dragging himself up before taking a second shot at All for One. All for One barely moved, raising a hand to catch the bullets easily with telekinesis. Ronin couldn't see the number one criminal's face behind a large strange mask, but he could see that All Might still wasn't running. Until everyone was safe, until he was done, Ronin would not stop. That was the kind of hero he wanted to be, as illogical as it seemed. The kind of hero who would have saved him. That was why he could not stop. The Ronin staggered back up, firing another shot as he leaned forward. He staggered like an undying wraith, continuing to press the attack without a shred of hesitation. You've done enough. Not yet, I haven't. The Lone Ranger moseyed forward, messily starting to finally try and aim his shots instead of just praying they hit his target. He didn't have the muscle to use a shotgun properly one-handed, but he could at least line up the sights on All for One while continuing to advance with psychotic commitment. Blood dripped down his mouth as Ronin fired the sixth and seventh shot, but he was too focused to notice. Gravel stuck to his body and head, plus his face was probably definitely visible. His mask and left leg guard were gone, and he didn't have a fucking clue where they went or even when he lost them. What a fun night. Not until everyone's safe. Revenant rolled his ankle, getting a feel for it before continuing to hobble forward, coughing off to the side and spraying more blood on their shitty little coat. All Might was still there. All Might didn't seem to have any power left, so he couldn't stop All for One. Revenant didn't care so much about that, but All Might couldn't protect himself anymore. So, if All Might wouldn't save himself, they would. Their bulletproof vest had broken, sort of. The plates inside the vest that actually made it bulletproof had shattered, so now it was just a fancy anti-life jacket that weighed them down, putting more weight on their bad ankle. Ronin continued swaying forward with animalistic conviction, locked entirely on All for One as he took 2 more shots but only fired 1. He was out of ammo. Shit. Now they were pretty close. All for One waved a hand and dropped the bullets, showing the large gap between them. All for One could literally dismiss Ronin's attacks with a wave of his hand, and what could Ronin do? You're not going to give up. All for One seemed conflicted as he stood there floated there, watching Ronin. Yeah, this scene really was pathetic. Ronin could barely keep moving anymore. The world was spinning and shifting. Ronin glared up as he felt 2 final items in his coat, ditching the shotgun 2 and grabbing 1, flicking the pin out with a thumb. He hadn't just been planning to take down Chimera, after all, he had to take down both Chimera and All for One to make sure everyone was safe. If he gave up, All Might would die. If he gave up, the society he hated would collapse but cause untold amounts of damage. If he gave up, what was the point in dragging himself out of that hospital? Never. Ronin lobbed his first item at All for One while putting himself between the number 1 villain and All Might as he finished what he started. A smoke grenade. All for One was definitely smarter than Chimera, that much was given, but he managed to recognize the grenade type almost instantly as he caught it and redirected it with telekinesis. However, that was the beauty of a smoke grenade, it was almost impossible to redirect. All for One caught the grenade itself and moved it away, but the smoke still came out. The smoke itself, being a gas, was much harder to control and capture with telekinesis. A wind manipulation quirk might have been able to get it out of the way, controlling it easier than telekinesis, but All for One didn't bring any wind quirks that'd actually help with this. He instead made a general pushing motion to move the smoke back as something cut through the smoke screen. A large Bowie knife, flipping end over end as it flew to try and impale him a second time. All for One remembered that knife from a long time ago, when he first met Ronin, from before Ronin even had his own name. When they first met, when they first faced down. Ronin didn't hesitate back then either, admitting he was going to throw a knife at All for One the second he got the chance. He even had the balls to follow through with it after saying that. All for One could catch the Bowie knife before it even left the smoke. It wouldn't take much effort. Telekinesis would have an easy enough time stopping the blade, or just his bare hand if he was feeling showy. Hell, he could even take the blade and throw it at All Might, killing him while avoiding hitting Ronin. Hisashi Shigaraki looked at Izuku Midoriya. His arm was mangled and twisted, hanging off of him limply. His leg was battered and dragging behind him. But his eyes, he wasn't done yet. Izuku Midoriya was already ready for his third attack if the Bowie knife didn't work, taking out a revolver for a few more shots. Just how many guns did this kid have? Hisashi's attention shifted back to the knife. He didn't really care about One for All right now. He sort of just proved that One for All could never be a real threat to him here tonight. He wasn't worried about the heroes either, they were leagues worse than All Might. But so was Izuku, yet he was still here and putting everything into this. Izuku's eyes were red. He was tired, and he looked like he was crying a bit. Made sense after all the pain he'd been through. He was Inko's son, after all. All for One could keep going for his image, or Hisashi could stop here for his son. Now, that wasn't much of a question, was it? The knife caught All for One in the shoulder through the smoke, making him take a step back from the impact. To be honest, Ronin was surprised the knife could even pierce All for One's skin, but maybe he didn't bring any defense quirks. It was stupid, but it would explain why he was dodging so much. After all that, after a tornado punch and 3 buildings in a row hitting me, a little knife outdoes my durability. All for One stood tall, plucking the knife out without a single concern for first aid. He inspected the knife before tossing it at Ronin nonchalantly. Ironic. All for One. Ronin panted as he tried to focus, but he was losing a lot of blood and losing consciousness even faster. That's me, yes, All for One smirked as he retorted cheesily, nodding along. You did a good job, my little blacksmith. Ronin didn't try to respond anymore, instead just raising a revolver with the strength he didn't have. He had been running on fumes, but those fumes were running dry. But he still had to buy a little more time, he still needed just a few more seconds. They're here, you know. You did it. All for One leaned in to whisper that, gesturing around them. Ronin glanced around blearily, taking in the scenery. Across the crater, dozens of heroes had finally arrived. It seemed the Nomus had finally been subdued, and now, everyone had come. Endeavor shouted angrily at All Might. Some old guy jumped around and quickly made his way to All Might. Gang Orca, Kamui Woods, even MT. Lady was there for some reason, with dozens more that he was too tired to name. He'd done it. He survived long enough. It was great to fight you, Ronin. Ronin snickered at that. He hardly had been fighting, and even he wasn't dumb enough to think All for One lost. You've got another trick, don't you? You could have dodged the knife. I could have, but I felt you deserved this. All for One nodded, placing a hand on Ronino, on Midoriya's shoulder, helping him to stand. All for One's hand had started to darken and had the texture of wet clay, his fingers beginning to stick together. You surprised me. You were too reckless. The gun was stuck between them, as dangerous as a paper airplane. Neither one was stupid enough to think that a revolver could really do anything to the number one villain, especially at this point. All for One's form had begun to melt, but he was seeming to hold himself together through sheer power of will. What were a few bullets against a man like that? A flesh-to-mud quirk. Shit, I don't have anything to counter that. Izuku Midoriya squinted, leaning against his opponent for support as his legs lost their strength. Language. All for One snorted, shaking his head. You were reckless, but you did enough. You did well. What, that's impossible. The surrounding heroes had started to get closer and were shouting, but they weren't making sense as they ran in with quirks running at full power. Cheese. This All for One is a twice clone. It's been a pleasure, but all things must end eventually. The twice clone of All for One gave Midoriya a gentle push backward, stepping back himself and turning to face the oncoming professional heroes. Goodbye, hero. Midoriya wasn't sure what came next as he stumbled backward, crashing to the ground as the pain ebbed away into nothingness. This time, however, it wasn't so cold. Chapter and notes. Yo, all that's left after this is the epilogue and my final thoughts, so I won't put any notes on the epilogue and make the final author notes a chapter in itself. I've got some stuff to say there and I know not everyone can stomach my bad writing enough to read the notes. I don't have much to say about this chapter itself. It's really fucking long. God, it's way too fucking long. Everything after All Might's final punch was originally going to be part of the epilogue, but I didn't want there to be any fighting in the epilogue so it got moved up. Also, while I'm thinking about it, congrats to everyone who figured out this AFO is a twice clone, as hinted in chapter 149 at the ending. Also, Midoriya misunderstanding AFO and his final unnecessary stand. It really wasn't necessary, but it's who Ronin is for better or for worse. The same drive that makes him so good at fighting makes him reckless for others' sake like AFO criticizes him for at the end of the chapter. We might see some stuff about it later. Still, we get a name reference for almost every persona except Ken. It'd be a little difficult I'm afraid, might be. I don't have much to say. I'll say thanks and stuff at the ending, but it's been fun. I hope you enjoyed this mess. I'm gonna go now. I guess Midoriya wasn't the only one who couldn't rest yet. See ya later, skaters. Chapter 158, we'll meet again. Chapter summary. Don't know where. Chapter notes. Don't know when. The end of Ronin, Season 1. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Midoriya's legs gave out from underneath him despite his best efforts, his eyes going blank as he tipped backward. The twice clone of All for One didn't even raise a hand to catch the boy, using telekinesis to discreetly lower his son to the floor. He knew with Ragdoll's search quirk that Izuku, while he definitely wasn't alright with his mangled arm and ribs which Izuku hadn't even noticed, would survive. All things would be fine, so he didn't have to worry anymore. Not that you'd know it by looking around this ruined city. The street had become a crater in the ground, with buildings and roads alike smashed to rubble. The Nomus had been rampaging for over half an hour but were now all captured, dead, or in hiding. And those morons calling themselves heroes. Those morons rushed at him from every direction, preparing a monumental amount of attacks to try and kill an already dying man. His form had already been compromised and he'd melt away in roughly 1 minute. But he had some time till then. The twice clone of Hisashi rose into the air, opening his mouth and beginning to sing in his final moments. Just one final thing to piss off All Might and to give the heroes something to think about. He wasn't a great singer, but he had a strong and confident voice. He wasn't worried, he had literally nothing to lose anymore. Hasashi ditched the helmet, punting it off into the distance with a big smile that all his work was done. He looked at the crumpled form of All Might. Crushed. Battered. The number one hero was completely broken, and by God it was beautiful. Nana Shimura had been dragged from the ground and being placed in handcuffs. It looked like she survived this little dance, surprisingly enough. The worst teacher getting a second crack at ruining a one-for-all user. It seriously was hilarious. The hero's quirks began to come close to All for One as he activated his telekinesis and wind quirks to defend himself, pretending to put up a fight as his voice echoed across the wreckage. He caught a glance at the news chopper flying overhead and gave them his best smile. He couldn't stop smiling as he raised both hands, firing off weaker shots in every direction. His power had been greatly reduced so he didn't blow his arms up as he became weaker with every second, but he still sent the heroes packing as they were launched backward. Damn, he was good. Heroes took All Might, Shimura, and Midoriya to the first responders and police. All for One gave them a little sarcastic wave goodbye as they left the crater, flying higher and higher as he sang with unbridled enthusiasm. Endeavor was leading the charge, sending out bouts of flame while the other heroes tried to get close enough to attack him. All for One's ever-increasing height made hitting him, needless to say, difficult. All for One threw his arms back, laughing as he sang while his quirks, one by one, began to wear off. This duplicate had lost the ability to use his quirks, but even as he plummeted to the ground, he continued to sing. The air roared in his ears as he fell, laughing all the way. He spun through the skies, spreading what was left of his arms as they turned to brown mud and slipped away. His flesh and his cares were long gone as he dropped through the air. For just a moment as he spun, he caught a glance from All Might. All Might stared at All for One last time. But it wasn't the last time. Even as the rebel and ground rushed up to meet him, All for One sang with a full heart, knowing that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Splat. From the screen, they could see One for All's final dance and were watching with amazement, eyes fixed on the only television inside the warehouse though it was littered with things for them. The heroes that the League had been running from went flying with just a flick of his wrist, and Twice's duplicates only had a fraction of the real person's power. Who was that guy? Twice was most confused of all. He made that duplicate after all, but he was undoubtedly the one who understood what he was seeing the least. This duplicate knew it was a fake, but it had no concerns about it. No worries as his form began to melt. How did he do it? Shigaraki stood back from the group, looking at the screen with an open mouth before standing upright with a large smile. The song, his master's words. He understood the message, master, he really did. He is my master, the number one villain in the world. Shimura took out something from one of the packages labeled for him, lifting the hand gingerly with a smile. All for one. Shigaraki put the hand on his face and walked forward into the group, confidence reassured. His master had faith and confidence in him, so he should too. He didn't save us for a television special, though. This is a continue point, and the real game's opening up. The League of Villains looked at Shigaraki as he spoke, who in turn was staring at the confident visage of his master on the screen. Even now, surrounded by heroes and as a dying clone, he was beating them single-handedly. That man told Shimura to no longer be afraid and to go forward. Even now, he was out there somewhere, waiting to see what Shigaraki would do. What would he do? That was simple. He'd exceeded All for One's every expectation. It's time to get started. The medical team hurried the three injured parties to their respective vehicles. Shimura was lifted first, followed by All Might, then the unconscious hero All Might didn't recognize. Shimura was placed in as many security measures as they had. Her arms and legs were stuck together, then her entire body was placed in a cylinder to seal off any movement. She was then taken away by a truck to a secure location, to be handed off the choppers once they were clear of All for One's final grandstanding. All Might took one last glance back at All for One as the rescued teams moved the other hero up to the rescue vehicles, locking eyes for just a moment as the villain fell from the air. No, as the duplicate of the villain fell through the air. This hadn't even been the real All for One. The real one was at least as strong as this one had been, but was likely much stronger. This one hadn't even used the quirk All for One to steal anyone else's quirks, which could have greatly upset the small balance that they fought on as unstable as that was. Nana Shimura, turned into a Nomu. All Might turned from the sight of All for One crashing into the ground messily to watch Shimura be lifted and bolted into the truck. The greatest hero in his eyes was being given the treatment they had prepared for All for One, the worst villain in his eyes. This was the power of All for One. Not to take quirks, but to destroy everything. With a wave of his hand, he had destroyed property, All Might, and Nana Shimura's legacy in under an hour. Years of work gone in minutes. And the strength of this Nomu. It sickened him to realize how powerless he was going to be going forward when he looked at the future of Nomus. They were becoming stronger, yes, but they were becoming more human. Anyone and everyone could be caught in this war between All for One and One for All. The number one villain made that clear when he destroyed All Might's Bastion of Hope, then tried to destroy All Might as a Bastion of Hope. Nana Shimura had been incredibly strong, but even the Nomu at the USJ could give the current. No, the former All Might a run for his money. Forget All for One, One for All was having trouble keeping pace with just the Nomus. But they couldn't stop there. Miriono, all of heroism would have to push past the Nomus if they wanted to win this war. It had been All Might's last fight, but as he watched the doors shut on Shimura's unconscious form before she was taken away, he swore that he'd see this war through till the end. He was down, but One for All wasn't done yet. All Might one last thing as a professional hero. As the camera swept over to him he pointed right back at it, standing up to the best of his abilities with the last of his strength and spoke, both to the next generation of both heroism and One for All. Next, it is your turn. The news channel went to advertisements, but he'd seen enough. He rose from his chair and crossed the room, turning off the television and plunging the room into darkness. He stood there for a moment, digesting his thoughts. The news had shown what was likely to be the last fight of All Might's career, and it had shocked him. He wouldn't call himself an All Might fanboy, but it was hard to deny that few recognized All Might's mentor other than him. He recognized Nana Shimura as the hero that All Might had apprenticed himself to back before he started to attend UA High School. All Might had been her sidekick for 2 years, from before he entered UA until partway into his second year, when Nana Shimura vanished. Well, she had returned now. While they couldn't understand the words they had been saying through the entire fight, it was clear to his eyes that it really was Shimura. Shimura's fighting style was heavily similar to All Might's, so it made sense that they were at least close at one point. However, her fighting style had a rigidity, as if mechanical. It wasn't natural, or if it was heavily restrained. It was forced. His years fighting tooth and nail gave him good eyes for things like that. Her fighting wasn't her own, not anymore. It was likely to have something to do with the figure who started flying towards the end, shooting everything while singing. His quirk must have been quite strange to fly and shoot things, some advanced air quirk most likely. Maybe that person had brainwashed and tortured Nana Shimura, maybe he had someone else do it, but All Might definitely blamed him for what had happened to Nana Shimura. He walked across the dim apartment, eyes casually passing over the knives he left everywhere in case of an attack as he thought things through. It didn't matter how though, since that strange figure had died at the end of the fight. It was a painful way to go, crashing into the ground like that under fire of multiple quirks. But the figure didn't seem to care. That villain was completely relaxed as he died, so maybe there was some trick to it. It was too early to tell. He crossed the apartment to look out the window, the spear he'd stolen vaguely in his line of sight. It was too early to tell what had happened, but it wasn't too early to tell what was going to happen. With All Might most likely retiring after that hard fight, crime and scum would rise. Fake heroes would take over the industry. His work would increase even more. Stain subconsciously licked his lips as he leaned out the window, staring into the night. Things were changing, for better or for worse, and he'd be along for the ride. Nezu had no intentions of leaving the school that day. He was incapable of helping in a direct fight, and by offering his advice for the attack no matter how little they had taken he believed he had done his part. At least, he had no intentions of leaving before he saw a familiar figure rushing headfirst into certain danger, wearing a coat that he hadn't seen in the better part of a year, and all of a sudden he couldn't get to the fight fast enough. He had gotten there before the end of the fight and was one of the people standing on the lip of the crater as they pulled up Shimura, Toshinori, and Ronin. Most of the medical staff and all of the reporters focused on All Might as he gave a big dramatic line, leaving Nezu some time to talk to the medical staff and plan out what was going to happen to the other hero. He's bad, but he's not doomed. Broken bones in the arm, we've got a messy fracture. Gonna need some wrap on that. His ribs are busted too, but we won't know the full extent of the damages until we get him into the hospital. The medical attendant over Ronin adjusted the straps holding him down, nodding. Ronin's arm was twisted and snapped, with white bones sticking out of black and blue flesh and fingers splayed in multiple directions. His face was bruised and beaten, and he lay on a stretcher, splayed out like a discarded ragdoll. This clue. Ronin suddenly resisted the straps, trying to force himself upright with the little strength he had in spitting blood. His body became like steel once more as his eyes locked onto and pierced through Nezu's. As broken and beaten as Ronin looked, those eyes were still alive like emerald flames. Is he safe? Yes. Nezu's response wasn't as loud as usual as he gently patted the young hero on the head. He's safe. You can rest now. Good. Midoriya's fragile frame returned as he limply lay down, his borrowed strength gone. Midoriya wore a gentle smile as his eyes closed again, his breathing becoming quiet. Goo. Nezu watched the boy go into an uncertain sleep, unsure of how conscious he really was or had been. This seemed more like a determination thing than a really well thought out thing, not quite his area of expertise. Cleaning up, however, was. While he wasn't supposed to help vigilantes, he didn't think many people would have gripes with helping someone who saved the #1 hero's life. He doubted Midoriya had a cover story for his new arm and ribs. Nezu smiled as he stepped back and did his own part, speaking briefly to the medical staff on site who was in charge of Midoriya before hero and principal alike climbed into an ambulance. Even if the fight was over, the paperwork had just begun, and Nezu intended to help out in every way he could. He'd make sure Ronin didn't become just one more name on the 4-0 Backwood Clock News. A stray Nomu walked through the sewers, mistaking the quiet for safety as it stopped for a moment to breathe. In an instant a large creature bolted through the pipes, pinning it down with one of its arms and crushing it against the pipes. It was dead in just half a second. The large one-snake Nomu took a step back before diving in and beginning to eat this new meal, already feeling its body begin to adapt and change. It hadn't been eating as much until now from scarcity of food, but suddenly there was a burst of activity and it was feasting like a king. Truly, this was a great time. The snake Nomu's body cracked and snapped as it lost more of the excessive mass, shifting and changing while molding the parts it no longer needed. New scales, harder than steel. Teeth like swords to tear into prey as it ate them. Huge wings for flight, horns for ramming into things, and long arms and legs for moving. It liked its arms and legs. They were fun to use and very different from their original body. Its tail whipped back and forth as it finished eating, stepping back on 2 legs. These meals were barely smarter than the animals it usually found in the sewers. But they had useful abilities. The gluttonous monster froze as it heard something moving, its head slowly pivoting as it turned and began to charge its body up, becoming tight and compact like a spring. A stray Nomu walked through the sewers, mistaking the quiet for safety as it stopped for a moment to breathe. Eiko and Mrs. Voorhees watched the new reporter, smiling as they saw the end of the footage. All Might was standing tall and confident beside the captured villainess, with the news reporter talking over the still frame. It was a late night, but it was basically impossible that school would start on time. School was supposed to start in 2 days, but it was probably going to get delayed a bit by this. Who would have slept through something like this? All Might's final fight. Even if Eiko wasn't into scary stuff like heroes and fighting, she at least knew who All Might was and what was happening on the screen. She had watched through her fingers the entire fight and was cheering right beside her mom when All Might managed the final big hit. She didn't get heroism, but even she knew it was a good thing that the weird guy with the scary helmet lost. The news reporters talking in a lot of circles about it, but nobody was saying much new stuff. Eiko, you better get to bed soon. Mom turned off the television and got up. It won't do for you to stay up too late watching stuff like that. Alright. Eiko yawned as her body and mind sided with Mom. That stuff looked pretty scary, and she didn't want to think about it. Maybe she'd hear more tomorrow and she could talk to Midoriya about it. They hadn't talked in a while, but they did send text messages for a while. Until a week ago, that is, when Midoriya said he wasn't going to be able to get in contact for a while. Then Dad told her that Midoriya had been in an accident and was at the hospital. It was pretty complicated. Still, once he was better she was gonna go see him. Eiko pushed away thoughts of the mess that had happened tonight and focused instead on what they were going to do tomorrow, smiling all the way as she went to sleep. You woke up in a hospital unexpectedly once, you'd done it a million times. Midoriya's body was riddled with dull aches and pains as he returned to consciousness, not entirely sure if he was inside a new room or the same room that he last woke up in, the one from after the forest training camp thing but before he rushed headfirst into danger and death. The whole place looked the exact same, with the exception of all the shit they stuck on him. His body was coated with tubes and wires monitoring everything at least twice, or so it seemed to him. Midoriya slowly sat up, feeling first his shoulder then his arm. They were sore still, but they definitely weren't broken anymore, so things were looking up. He had a new scar on the side of his forearm where the bone had been, LGP. Just the thought of it made him want to puke. He might have been fighting for a long time, but he still wasn't used to those kinds of injuries. He hoped he never became used to them. Quote. Oh, how long have you been there? The whole time, but I only started paying attention when you were checking out your arm. Mao laughed as he sat on the windowsill, arms folded while he leaned back. He was wearing a leather jacket and his dreadlocks were tied back to show off that big hammy smile. He rolled up one of the jacket sleeves as he spoke and held his arm up, showing off the scars from their first fight. Guess we be matching now, sucka tilda. Guess we are. Midoriya smiled and nodded, leaning up. Did the big man send you? Yup, he figured you got some questions, and I'm the safest person to tell ya stuff. But that was at da first hospital. Nobody expected ya dumbass to run into that big mess. Mao rolled down his jacket sleeve and walked forward, kicking a chair over to the bed and sitting down in it, leaning far back and crossing his arms behind his head. You did some serious shit, dude. Thanks, I think. Midoriya laughed it off, then looked around. Well, my first question is where my mom is. I really thought she'd be in here. She knows, right? Mao nodded. To answer da big questions ya got, ya mom's on a call right now, it's been 3 days, and I got ya digs. Mao's head flicked up and back to a camera on the ceiling, letting Midoriya know that they were being watched without words. Seriously, for a dumbass, Mao was pretty smart sometimes. Thanks. So, what happened? Camp an accident. Mao leaned even further back, checking out the ceiling. You hurt ya hand and face, then got sent to a hospital. Hospital sent you to a diff hospital when she'd went down, the car got hit by a Nomu, and now. Here I am. Thanks for the catch-up. Anything else I should know? 3 days. School should have started last night, but he'd be surprised if school started on time with that huge accident. They were probably having a huge memorial for All Might last night. 1 day to set it up, 1 day to pull it off, so school should be restarting right now. School starts next week. They didn't want to start it with just 2 days, and it ain't like anyone at ya place gives 2 sheets o sheet, ya mom. Mao suddenly tried to snap upright but instead only succeeded in losing all balance, his chair tipping back a little too far and sending him toppling to the floor as a doctor and Inko Midoriya came in. Seriously, for such a smart guy, Mao was pretty dumb sometimes. Mr. Voorhees, we're trying to help people get better, not make them worse. Please, no horseplay in the patient's room. The doctor on hand chewed Mao out while Inko moved past that and straight to Midoriya. Are you alright? How are you feeling? She grabbed his hand, clearly worried. Izuku gave her a calm smile, nodding. Don't worry mom, I'm fine now. Why? What happened? Izuku played the role of an innocent soul who didn't even know a thing. He had, supposedly, been unconscious when All for One and All Might threw down, so he wouldn't know about All Might's probable retirement. Hell, that was still mostly true. For all he knew, All Might was still up and harrowing right now. All Might was dumb enough to do that. Oh, my poor baby. He wasn't ready for the sudden head grab, but he definitely should have been. He was pretty sure she was crying, but he wasn't sure if he was or not. Ma'am, please refrain from any sudden moves with the patient. He's still recovering, and we don't know his condition yet. The doctor on hand kept a tight leash on Inko Midoriya and reined her in the second things seemed to even go in the direction of trouble. As for you, Izuku Midoriya, I will once again ask how you're feeling. Any pains? Well, Izuku glanced at his mom, knowing she'd worry if he said anything, but did admit a few. My side and arm still hurt a little bit. Good. The doctor made some notes on an electronic tablet, nodding along. We were worried about damaged nerves, but you seem to be doing fine. Really well, in fact. I see you've had a broken arm before. Midoriya just nodded while his mom cried in the background. The doctor did some more work on the tablet before turning to face both mother and son at once. You should see a full recovery very soon and possibly leave the hospital today, but we're gonna have to run some tests first. Is that alright? This really was a formality. Who in their right mind would turn down some basic medical tests to make sure you weren't gonna die? Still, they agreed quickly enough, and his mom left with the doctor to do the paperwork while the old one stayed with him and now to check the machines one last time. Midoriya took this as a chance to ask a few more questions to the big guy, just sorting out a few little details along the way. Hey, Mao, when do you think I can get my camping stuff? Anytime good. Whenever you're free, dude. Mao stood up and stretched, rubbing the back of his head. I want ya to know I'ma get chewed out now for your fancy tricks though. Let that weigh on your conspicuous. That doesn't sound right. Close enough. Midoriya leaned back, asking just one final question. And what happened to the clothes I was wearing? Mao shrugged. Both knew that Midoriya had brought a ton of weapons into the fight against All for One, but neither one seemed to know where they all went. Did that mean he finally got rid of that old jacket? Well, I'm a split now. I only came cause I was told ya dumbass would be walking up today, and Doc was right on da money. Mao put the chair back and clapped the doctor on the back. Ya doing da good shit here, Doc. Later Sendipiter. They waved goodbye before Mao dipped out, giving him a moment of quiet. The doctor then left to attend to other patients, giving Midoriya a moment of silence with just his thoughts. He had thought about his past a lot recently. Where he came from, what he had done, why he did things. But he'd already done that. He could do it again, but that'd be retreading ground. Where did he come from? Best not to talk about it. Where did he come from figuratively? Probably best not to talk or think about it, but that was a little more open-ended. He came from bloody knees and bruised faces, from rough nights and idolized idiots. But that was where he came from, and to come from something meant to leave the past behind and move on. He had become stronger, much stronger than before. Albeit not like Rally He probably could use a lot of work at literally getting stronger, but he felt more stable. Even with his current mental issues, he felt like he had a much better grounding than before. Why he did things, he still didn't know, to be honest. He had given a weak answer of wanting to be a hero. But what did that mean? Would he charge in to save anyone? Who did he save? Should he make money off of it? And just after I said I wouldn't think about the past again. Now here I am, retreading old ground. Midoriya snickered at that and turned his head, looking out the window at the sunset. He had thought about his past loads, but now, it was time to move on. It was time to start looking ahead and figuring out what he was going to do. What he wanted to do. This was an ending, but didn't someone say all endings were just something else's beginning? Maybe. He didn't remember, and to be honest he didn't really care that much. Things to do. Oh, God. Repairs. His regular outfit probably took so much damage from his big attack back in the training camp. When he finally got free of this hospital he was probably going to spend all his free time fixing that stuff. School. He had schoolwork, or at least, he was supposed to. But Midoriya had finished all his schoolwork for the year and was now doing a kind of free-flow thing. He kept studying for finals, sure, but he usually spent his time in the classroom planning other things out. Maybe he'd spend his time picking some new stuff to learn. Fighting. He had been fighting for a while, but if fighting that muscular guy taught him anything, he still wasn't anywhere close to a master yet. He only beat Stain by having a weapon that hard-countered Stain, then by breaking orthodox fighting patterns, and finally pulled out a victory by fighting 2 versus 1. Talk about a cheap victory. So, he was going to get some sword lessons finally. About damn time too, he really had gone too long without knowing any real kendo. And maybe some other styles. Fencing. Staff fighting. Maybe he could join a dojo. Nah, who was he kidding? Was he kidding? Maybe he would go to a dojo. He didn't have any concrete plans right now, he was just some dopey-looking guy sitting on a bed with broccoli hair. And he wasn't even thinking about making more weapons. He still had weapons to craft, but he forgot about them way back whenever he was thinking about repairs. He really was all over the place. Midoriya leaned back in the bed, smiling as he thought through all the possibilities. He had so much to do. Alright, Midoriya, we're gonna run you through your physicals soon. With a little luck, you might be going home tonight. Midoriya nodded and went to get up, putting his weight on his left hand as he went to get up and immediately regretting it. It looked like the first thing he was going to do was go home and rest. Chapter End Notes. A man walked down a bustling street, moving through the world at his own pace with his cane keeping the time. The click of his shoes cut through the hubbub with punctuality and purpose as he made his way across the city, walking through crowds with an unmistakable and unshakable confidence. People made way for him naturally as he looked down his glasses at them. They didn't even realize they were doing it, pushed back just by his presence. The man's path was blocked by a large group of people with their attention fixed on a shop screen. A newsman and newswoman were speaking, showing footage from a few days ago. Former #1 American and Japanese hero, All Might, has now released an official statement that he will be entering retirement after the large fight we saw in Yokohama, Japan, against the 2 large villains. Neither villain has been identified after their monumental fight against the hero. The man couldn't help but smile as he continued walking, pushing through the crowd with his usual level of confidence as he spoke Japanese. Damn good television. He pushed through the street and into his new building, checking his ID badge at the door before walking through. He didn't stop for a single beat as he made his way through the building as if he owned, possibly because he secretly did. He made his way to the help desk, smiling casually and directing himself through the secretary before making his way into the elevator, checking his ID one last time before riding up to the 6th floor and stepping out. The man dealt with one last receptionist before he was sent to the team he was going to be working on, catching eyes with his bright white hair and tall stature. He looked to be about 6 feet tall, at least, and was locked at 25. The benefit of shapeshifting quirks was you could just shapeshift into a younger version of yourself. He greeted his team leader friendly enough with a handshake before he was introduced to the rest of the members. Alright, everyone, this is the transfer from our LA division, Hisashi Midoriya. He's going to be with us for about 6 months. The man walked with a spring in his step, his eyes sweeping across the group with a playful smile on his face. So much talk of beginnings, but this was the end. All of his work, all of his effort, it all came together now. Thank you for having me. I hope we'll get along well. Chapter 159, Bob Stevens. Chapter Summary. An author rambling for half a century. This has nothing to do with the plot and is just some behind-the-scenes stuff. If you don't care about that, skip to the summary at the end. Sorry for the cringe. Chapter Notes. One last sorry for all the unsudden foreshadowing in 158. Sorry I'm a dick. See the end of the chapter for more notes. I'm not really sure what to say, but if you follow my train wreck of a writing style from the beginning, that's no surprise. I was first thinking of taking this chapter as a sort of retrospective, a chance to review my story and share some of the work behind the screen so you could get into the head of the madman who created this flaming garbage. I was gonna show off the date this story started, say some vague things about what I was doing at the time, and maybe I will. Fuck it, I will. On July 9, 2019, I was bored as fuck and decided I was going to waste my time by making a brief fanfic in the Hero Aka world. A little story focusing on throwing some martial arts into the world of Hero Aka, with Midoriya staring as our pov and protagonist as he delved into a world of heroes and villains way out of his depth. He'd learn, he'd grow, he'd win some, he'd lose some, but he was going to change and the world would change with him. That was the idea behind that first fanfic. That fanfic, as you might have guessed, is not Ronin. The dates are wrong, this is a year before Ronin got started. That is a fanfic I made while stuck at someone's house over the summer, bored out of my marbles cause it was too hot to do anything and it never saw the light of day. It was going to focus on Midoriya with a sound quirk, remix, and using it sort of like Soundwave from the Prime series to attack and fight, using his quirk to supplement traditional martial arts. That series, which never got a name since it was all made on crappy documents by a bored guy on his summer trip, will probably never see the light of day. Midoriya's fighting style was going to be quirk-aiding martial arts, he'd use a hollow pipe as a weapon, and it's way too close to Ronin to ever be done now. I won't be doing that series now because Ronin cropped a lot of ideas from it, and if I did, there would be a very noticeable repeat of old ideas. Still, that was my first delve into fanfics, and it was the first time I really sat down and wrote for fun. It was total shit, I didn't show it to anyone, and I only wrote 10 chapters. I have no clue what happened to the original documents anymore, and I'd be amazed if I could find all 10 chapters still. But, this unnamed project wasn't my only try at making a fanfic. That's right, I'm talking about the original JoJo plus Hero Aka fanfic. What? No one cares. Yeah, we'll skip to the real shit. Long story short, I wrote a JoJo plus Hero Aka fanfic, never published it, then accidentally deleted it before anyone ever saw the thing. Big sad but it was for the best. Now, with a whopping 2 fuck-ups under my belt and an AO3 account I wasn't doing anything with, I got bored again. Something I rant about a lot is fanfics not updating quickly, and you can probably tell where this is going. The 2 fanfics I will specifically throw this time under the bus are Cobalt Star, a JoJo plus Hero Aka fanfic that inspired me and actually changed my views on writing, and Pro Hero Metal Bat, which so far has taken 3 years to release 18 of what the author believed to be 85 chapters. If Pro Hero MB continues its current release schedule, it will take 13 years to finish. Well, at least we've already dealt with 3 of those years, so we've only got to wait for 10 more tilde. I'd say I'm kidding but I am naturally pessimistic, a huge dick, and love taking the piss out of other people to make myself feel better. I had so much fun just stopping from writing this to go check dates for Pro Hero MV, doing some quick math, and making fun of it. I had more fun doing that than I've had writing this fanfic in months. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To get back on track and not apologize because I'm not sorry since I'm a dickhead, I was sick of waiting for 2 fanfics that have only updated 3 Cobalt Star and 4 Pro Hero MV times since I started writing Ronin 9 months ago. I have always been a dickhead in my heart of hearts and said to myself, hey, bozo. You almost wrote 2 fanfics. You should write a fanfic to see why they're taking so long. That's right, the story that you're reading now was just made to one-up some other fanfic writers, cause that's the kind of dick I am. This is also why I can never compliment myself, cause I look back at this moment and realize that I'm definitely the bad guy here. Still, I decided to write a fanfic to figure out what was taking the stories I was reading so long. And, if you've checked the chapter count of this fanfic compared to either of them, you realize that I completely missed the point. Sort of, but more on that later. Boom, bet you didn't expect setup and payoff in the fucking author's notes. Damn, I definitely have a problem. So, enough tangents. We're gonna go on a quick trip to the events leading up to chapter 1. Bob_Stevens, the bored dumbass he was, got sick of waiting around for shit to update. He decided to write his own unoriginal story, and that a nameless narrator do mean unoriginal. Bob didn't create it immediately though, because his boredom got sidejacked again with school starting. School starting meant Bob didn't have enough free time to actually sit down and write, but he did have enough time to plan. At least, he didn't have enough free time at first. Eventually, on November 17, 2020, Bob Stevens stopped paying attention during class and, instead, wrote a shitty little chapter to serve as the opening for his new fanfic. For real this time it's actually Ronin. And let me tell you, nameless narrator to reader, that first chapter's shit. I have genuinely no fucking clue how anyone gets past the first 5 chapters, but hey. Maybe it was because, later on in the same day, also November 17th, the second chapter got released. Then still the same day, still November 17th, THTHE third chapter came out. Then the 4th, and 5th. Needless to say, when D&D got cancelled that day, Bob Stevens got to work. Yes, this entire series got kicked off because of a cancelled D&D session. How the fuck did this get popular again? From there, chapters were published consistently every day for 2 weeks with 1 to 2 chapters a day, right up until the mid-30s to 40s I think. I honestly couldn't tell you when, but eventually, Bob_Stevens slowed to a more manageable 1 chapter a day. Eventually, this continued to slow down until we hit our current pace today, and our current end right now. There were a few outside stories that affect Ronin, but most of them will remain unnamed. Shout out to GubbyGubGU though, a friend of mine who agreed at gunpoint to help fix this mess, reviewing from chapters 1 to 70, then helped by editing chapters 71 to 96. He did a lot to help this fanfic when he was here and did a lot of work to make it better. He's the reason the first 10 chapters are actually legible now. That was right around the time that my enthusiasm started to really run out. As people who have gone back and read the comments notes will probably know, I really didn't like the Beast arc. It wasn't great, but this was the start of the downward spiral foreshadowed earlier. Plot twist, the nameless narrator was Bob_Stevens the whole time. You've been bamboozled, I know, but the real twist is that I am no longer enjoying writing Ronin. Ronin was, at first, a fun passion project. Just something to do while in class to kill time. It took like 3 hours to write a chapter, tops. Maybe it comes down to the fact that I'm thinking and editing my chapters more these days, maybe it's because they're getting longer, but chapters are starting to take a pretty long time to write. At first I thought I might just be getting slow, but then I stopped for 3 days to take a break and write a quick chapter for my other fanfic. I wrote a chapter in 4 hours, and 2 more chapters over the next 2 days. Clearly, it was not just me slowing down that was making this take so long. A different someone once said that the middle of the story is the hardest to write. In the beginning, you have enthusiasm, energy, and excitement to push through since you just started. In the end, you have the fulfillment and satisfaction of almost being done. In the middle, though, you only have your own determination to keep pushing you along. Yeah, and I wish this someone was as right as the last one. The beginning was great, the middle was rough, and the ending was almost literally painful. Pretty much every chapter I had to force myself to sit down, focus, and write. Hell, even now I keep tabbing out to do other things, and this is literally it. I physically can't get closer to the ending, yet I still don't want to write a thing. And this brings me back around to the beginning. I know this final mess has been rough, but I'm trying to keep it real with y'all and keep myself honest, so these are my mostly unfiltered thoughts. This entire chapter is optional anyway and might get deleted anyways, so I'm playing fast and loose here. I want to go back and mention the 3 things that I wrote Ronin for, cause I've mentioned 2 of the reasons before. First, like I mentioned at the start of this story but haven't in a while, Ronin was written as an experiment. As mentioned above, Ronin was my first real story that I was putting into the real world. I was a little antsy at first, worried that it would be a total flop and I'd go down in history as the world's biggest loser, then I realized no one would ever figure out that my real name is totally Robert Stevenson because I put a fake name down, Bob Stevens. Besides, it wasn't like Ronin was going to get big. Just a small little story to practice my writing chops with. In the initial draft when I started writing everything like a madman, I discarded the odd plan of going all the way to AFO and settled instead for a shorter 50 chapters. I could totally end a fanfic in 50 chapters, that was easy. It might take like, a year to get to 50, but I thought I could do it. This also plays into what I said above when I was rambling about fanfics that haven't updated in forever. I didn't understand why they took so long to come out and I wanted to try out some of the things I saw, and hopefully I'd figure out why my favorite authors took so long to write new chapters by writing some myself. Yeah, I still am not sure why, but now at least I have a few guesses. We'll get into them for the 3rd reason, but no more skipping. The second reason I wrote Ronin was that I had a story I wanted to tell. A third someone man, there are a lot of someones in this said that everyone has a story to tell. Since the first was right and the second was wrong in my eyes, it's only fitting that I have no clue if this advice is true. I don't know if I have anything to say, but I'm still gonna talk. That's the beauty of rambling, words are never far away. I think I have some message to say, so I'll try to slip it in between flashy fights. If nothing else I'll get some practice writing action. Writing Ronin really changed my perspective on canon hero Akka. It changed my perspective on a lot of things, but let's keep this focused. I got a better understanding of what Horikoshi was doing when he wrote some of the arcs. I finally figured out that Horikoshi isn't a perfect author and makes mistakes. Which is good, because if Hero Akka was perfect the fanfics would kind of be pointless. After all, where do you go from perfect? Ronin might be way worse than Hero Aka, but I hope I can be pretentious and pretend there was some bigger message in it that I wanted to tell. But there was one big thing I wanted to do with Ronin. Third and last, I wanted to finish something. Yep, that's it. If you go back up, I had 2 fanfics that never got finished. I made stories before that, stories that never saw the light of day, but I decided that I'd change. I'd write a story all the way through. I could go the distance, I would go the distance. I'd see it through, no matter how hard it got. To be a bit of a dick to all of you, it wasn't the readers that made me finish this mess. It was a line of frustrations at myself, at my laziness, and my bad writing. That's why I only started once I knew where I wanted to end it, that's why I finished this, and that's why I wrote Ronin. To prove I could, even if I didn't think so. And on the other hand, if no one read this mess, I definitely would have just ended it at 50 chapters and called it a day. I'd say I did what I set out to do, pack my bags, and I might not have kept writing. It was people responding that gave me the confidence to keep going, so thanks. Now you're an accomplice to my arson when I made this dumpster fire. Even if I ended Ronin because I told myself I would, I continued Ronin because of people like you. Reading this fanfic even if all you did was make the hit counter go up one more number. Commenting, talking about the stuff I wrote. Making fan art. Sorry I haven't commented on it, it's that laziness coming through again. My B. So, the practically obligatory thank yous. Thanks for coming by and spending some time with a deranged penguin writing just to spite people, writing just because his D&D got cancelled, and writing just to prove to himself that he could. Thank you for coming by and reading this work, commenting on it, and being here. Congrats on making it this far, too. You just read 158 chapters. That's way more than some regular stories. Mark that off on your calendars or whatever. Thank you to the people who made fan art for this. I'm honored that people looked at my mess of pettiness, spite, and lack of D&D and made some amazing stuff. I've gotten several pieces through the year, and so this time, I'm gonna be a dick to you guys. Sorry. I've done a few jokes on this fanfic before, and I've got one left. Those with a good memory will remember that I celebrated reaching 50 and 100 chapters with my own art, but I haven't done that with 150 yet. Chapter 160 of Ronin is planned to go up in 1 week, on September 1st. It is going to be a chapter of just fan art, just for fun. I'll be posting my own art in case no one wants to show up in the cringe and trying to get permission in the meantime. If you have any art you want to include, feel free to drop a link below. And with that, you can probably tell this is coming to an end. You don't send people to the comments when you've got a lot left, after all, and the story's already over technically. At the time of writing, chapter 158 is already done, I'm just sitting on it while I make this mess. Yes, I'm using this song. Yes, I'm a dick. So let's finish this, clean and concise. No more beating around the bush. Ronin's going on hiatus if you couldn't tell by all the, it's not over, shit last chapter. Seriously, how many different ways did I wind up saying it? Now that was corny. I don't want it to be over, but I guess I wouldn't have done my job if I don't end it. Man, I say I hate drama but here I am hamming it up. I'm such a hypocrite. Well, Ronin's going on hiatus for 1 month at least. If the plans change, I'll post that, but I already put that in the notes. Now I'm just wasting time. I'm definitely not going to do something like this for my next fanfic or even the next hiatus if we get that far, but I wanted to put it somewhere. That's the power of being a dickhead writer, I guess. So, in summary, 1 month break at least fanfic resume September 24th, earliest fan art chapter next week, no plot thanks for reading. Chapter and notes. Thanks for the fun, amigos. I guess this is where I should say yo, but I think this time I'll just say adios. Chapter 160, Art Stuff. Chapter Summary. It's stuff. About art. Stuff art. Art stuff. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. So, here's the order. I'll start with my garbage art so that you can cringe, then I'll show some works from the other people who don't have 2 left hands. Their names and where to find them will be found at the end of their pictures. Everything above this message was made by Bob_Stevens. He's pretty cringy, don't check him out. Bail and save yourselves. If you're feeling bored or masochistic, here's how to follow him. Yes, this is hilarious deviant art, where I post these pictures cause I don't know where else to put them. Iridescent Snake made these beautiful things, and behold. Real links for the real artists instead of jokes. Tumblr. Instagram. James Bukov made these, and I have no clue how to get a hold of him. Here's where I got the picture. Reddit. Chapter and notes. Yo, I'm just saying once again, you can find the artist's descriptions underneath all of their pictures. Sorry some of the art got adjusted, you couldn't look at the whole picture at once on the page and you couldn't tell how cool it looked if you couldn't see the whole thing at the same time. Hope it makes sense cause I'm bad at words. But with that, we're done. I'm free. FREEE tilde. Hope I didn't mess up anything too bad, thanks to the OG artists for making their stuff, and god why did I try to paint anything? I only have watercolors with 8 different colors. This is why my painting's looking like what the French call, le backward garbage. Thanks to everybody who let me post their stuff for this. I love art and if it paid money it'd definitely be what I tried to make a career out of, but I suck at it and B I need to eat so no dice. Big sad. That's probably why I love fan art so much, so big shout out to anyone who can draw. Thanks for making the world a cooler place than my spaghetti stains on paper. Now, I gotta slip into a shadow zone for what's left of month to think and plan. Thanks for stopping by, but for now, adios. Chapter 161, Restock. Chapter Summary. After a month of thinking, contemplating, and harsh studying, I still have no idea what goes here. Shame. More mistakes. Chapter notes. The start of Ronin, Season 2. See the end of the chapter for more notes. The room was dimly lit with the windows shut, a little light leaking through the curtains he installed. He didn't want anyone accidentally peeking in right now, with classes still going on outside, but this club room served as his workshop. He had to get to work and get this over with before Aiko showed up after school ended. A shame half of the lights in the classroom weren't working. Again. On the table, beside him, a phone buzzed out reports of a certain huge event that took place 4 days ago. He had been out of commission for a while and he needed to catch up quickly, so the best way he could think of was to listen in while he worked. Casualties were kept low through the efforts of our professional heroes. While dozens of Nomus have been captured or killed, there still are some left unaccounted for. Keep an eye out for any suspicious activity and please, don't stay out too late. Always remember to contact heroes in case of emergencies. They picked up their jacket first, admiring the mess it had become. What was this, their 5th coat? Only one had ever managed to survive its first fight. It had been torn, some parts were downright shredded. They moved across the mess of leather with eyes and fingers, noting the many damages. It's most likely unfixable. It's definitely not worth the effort of repairing. Its voice was emotionless and cold as it removed one of the bulletproof plates from the inner lining of the jacket, pouring the plate out more so than pulling it. The plate had been broken through and thoroughly shattered most of the way through, making it more bulletproof dust than plate. No confirmation on the identity of the male villain still. Scientists are saying that DNA testing from what has become his corpse is inconclusive at best, but his body has been fully captured and sent to the maximum security prison Tartarus just in case. Still, it's not unsalvageable. He removed the rest of the plates from the coat then held it up, checking how much of the material was still in one major piece. We can use it to create more designs going forward, to modify other jackets if I'm careful enough. Good. Resourceful and efficient. They folded up what had once been their jacket, moving on to the bodysuit. Its injuries were virtually identical to the jacket's. Its more humanoid shape reminded him of the other layer of injuries, the ones that wrapped his own body. He could see the white line running across his left fingers, the scar from where his fingers had been severed. He leaned forward suddenly, taking deep breaths. That was a little painful to think about. If he thought about stuff like that, his mind naturally wandered to other things, like the hot pain as his own bones punctured his arm, how the dirt became wet and sticky when it mixed with his blood, or how his world had slowly gone cold and dark. The whole country is in mourning for the former #1 American and Japanese hero. All Might has now released an official statement that he will be entering retirement after the large fight we saw in Yokohama, Japan, against the two large villains. Neither villain has been identified after their monumental fight against the hero, and if you have any information, please contact your local police branch. In addition, the second hero to show up at the scene still remains anonymous and unidentified. Once again, if you have any information about any of these people, please contact your local police branch. The noise of his phone pulled him back into reality. The vigilante smirked as he wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, throwing his green hair back and rising. This wasn't a time to sit back in his thought and stew, this was a time for action. Reluctance was how most of his problems got started, and even if he never learned a damn thing he'd at least pretend he did. He pushed the coat to the side and reached into the bag Aiko had brought to school today, filled with his equipment from a summer camp that wasn't even for him. He pushed through the cold chill that ran down his spine as he drew out the next item, a broken and partially shattered black orb. Some of the wires from what once been his mask stuck out, swaying slightly as he fiddled with the helmet. A couple of attempts to turn it on before he got a small reaction, laughing out loud to himself as he slipped it on and checked what still worked. Well, I mean, just the clock isn't terrible. At least I know the time now. It said 6 p.m. Lunch was 30 minutes ago. Give it up, the thing's scrappy, the night vision still worked. Alright, the thing was mostly scrap. He removed the helmet, compacting it up as far as its crushed and cracked form could go, and set it atop the jacket. He moved to the next item as quickly as he went through the last one, pulling out a gauntlet. Then a second gauntlet. Major changes to the top 10 lineup, with All Might's retirement. It seems for the first time in 10 years, Endeavor's position is going to change as he rises up to take the place as the #1 hero. It's still unknown how long he'll hold that title, though, with All Might's protege on the rise. Lemillion, a third-year student at UA, is already receiving training and is projected to make the top 10 in his first year, much like Kamui Woods. The gauntlets had some major damage, but it wasn't as bad as the others. It was cracked and cut, but since the important parts were metal it could probably be reforged. They fitted one of the gauntlets back on, moving their arm to check how the straps were holding up. If the structure was damaged too badly, they might just have to rebuild the whole thing. He fumbled with the wires, plugging the gauntlet in and activating the pull motion. His phone slid across the table and off the ledge, into his waiting palm. Still worked pretty well, so at least some of the wiring was still good. Heroes around the world have dedicated moments to the former #1 hero after his retirement. The Hero Association has given its solemn thanks to All Might for all the works he's done over the years. He shook his head, setting down the phone and gauntlets and moving on to the next pair of items, his old boots and shin guards. He went through those too. 4. He went through whatever you'd call that combination even faster than he thought about them, stuck wondering if the shin guards counted as separate pieces since they weren't always attached to the boot's focus. Eventually pushing past that largely irrelevant detail, he noticed that the bag he'd taken to the camp was getting suspiciously empty and kept his fast pace going as he pulled the last items out. Dozens of needles that had fallen out of the jacket, a pair of modified pistols, then a shattered sheath. There was only one last thing in the bag. He could see the shape, a streak of metal that glinted in the bag. What had once possibly been, for a time, the strongest weapon in the world. He reached into the bag, fingers wrapping around the handle as he slowly drew the blade one last time. From what had once been 3 feet of blade, a little under half a foot was left. Its tip was sharp from where the blade snapped in half, the sword's body bent slightly to the left. The tsuba, the handguard, was blackened and cracked. Bits of dirt and soot rubbed off onto his thumb as he ran a finger along it, inspecting it with careful eyes. The handle had cracked underneath the wrappings, snapped in two. This was more likely from his grip than the final attack itself as he threw everything he had into one slice. Everything, even his own life. His right eye stung as he lurched forward, his legs going weak. He could still feel it, stuck to him. The strange hollow feeling on his face from where a metal fragment punctured his own eye, the scar had left him. His eye ached. He could remember the sensation of the blood running down his face as his body slowly shut down, his breathing becoming rigid as the life left him. But it hadn't left him, not yet. His grip on the shattered sword tightened as his eyes found new focus and he swallowed, forcing the rising sensation in his throat back down while he firmly planted his feet and rose. They gripped the shattered frame of Yamato, eyeing the broken sword. Revenant looked down the edge of the blade, an eye raised. Forget it being broken, the thing was bent to boot. I don't think we're good enough swordsmiths to fix this thing. Then it's fine as it is. He breathed in slowly, getting into position and taking a slow practice swing. The electronics are definitely broken, but it's fine. Yamato wasn't the only sword we had. He picked up what was left of the saya, sheathing Yamato with an air of finality and purpose. He wasn't here to sit around, reminiscing. He was here to plan for the future, to think ahead, and when all that went to shit, he'd improvise. For now though, as the aching in his ribs told him, it was time to sit back and plan. He had to get ready to go forward, fix up his equipment. With the former #1 hero gone, however, the crime rate has already begun to rise. We're seeing so far a 40% increase after only 4 days since All Might's dramatic final battle and retirement, with more criminals daring to act in broad daylight. Well, what do you know? His eyes flicked to his phone, leaning over to quickly flick the screen and check the time. He had 2 hours till school ended and Echo swung by. 2 hours was plenty of time. He was checking his equipment, but how could he check his equipment if he didn't do a field test? It was time for a little improvisation. Chapter and notes. Yo yo yigati yo. It's been a hot minute since I've done anything on this fanfic, but here it is. And it's a recap. Big oof. Friendly advice for the whopping nobody who cares. When you take a break, plan for both a relaxation part and a work part. I realized 2 days ago I still had no idea how I was gonna get back up and get back into this. Cause I only gave myself 2 days, since I'm a moron, I still have no idea how to get back into this. This chapter only exists cause I didn't allow myself to hit the backspace, else I would still be staring at a blank screen with a smashed keyboard and a lot of ripped out hair in my hands. Long story short, still burned out. Who knew? I'd say this was a twist, but it seems my writing enthusiasm from when I started writing this mess lasts just as long as my writing burnout. Big sad. I still don't know what I'm doing and I could go for another year without writing a thing, but if I stop now I don't think I'd ever start again. So here I am, back again once again, and today people, today, I'm gonna stop trying to be a stick in the mud about this. The train wreck pulled into the station, so now it's a road trip and you were crazy enough to get on the bus with me. You nut job. This chapter's a bit repetitive, but it's been a month since we last gathered here to cringe at my writing, so just wanted to take a quick second to try and fail to get everyone up to speed. Still, if I fail, that means I did something and I think I'm alright with that. Next chapter, shit's gonna pick up again as I see if I still know how to write one guy getting punched in the face by another guy. Thanks for swinging by. Now, I'm gonna get moving. I'm gonna try to one-up my first fight scene now. Adios, amigos, and glad to see y'all. Chapter 162, The World Without Yamato. Chapter summary. Ronin getting back on the streets while I get back into writing. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The alleyway was unnaturally quiet, cut off from the rest of the city by a single turn. Just 20 feet out and you were back on the main road, back in the public eye, but here. Alleys were great at keeping secrets. 4 figures stood over one in the alleyway, the one pushing himself back into the wall as he breathed heavily. His eyes were wide as they darted around, trying to find a way out of this confined space and into the safety of the streets. Just one hero passing by to save him and protect him from. One of the men slammed a boot right next to their victim's head, his crocodile mouth forming a confident smile that ran the length of his snout but couldn't quite make it to his eyes. Come on, man, just hand over the wallet already. We know you've got some dough on you, so just make this easy. The other men snickered, evidently enjoying this new way of making easy cash. Ever since All Might retired, the big heroes had been running themselves ragged with fancy parades and fan service and other shit. It was a great time to be a small fry, feasting when the big boys were too busy boasting. For your sake. The crocodile man leaned just inches away from the businessman. He turned the blade against his own mouth and suddenly snapped down, breaking the blade in half with one bite. He kept his head nice and close to the businessman as he chewed the metal like gum, making sure the point got across. The man couldn't move fast enough, which was partially why he was taking so long to get his wallet out. His hands were shaking so badly he entirely missed his pocket twice, almost whimpering. The villains were definitely enjoying this, part of the reason they picked this guy as their target. Partially because they knew he'd be carrying cash, but mostly for this moment. Their victim's expression as he froze up, slowly realizing how hopeless this was for him. Clink. All the villains, heads snapped over down the alley, false confidence and bravado discarded as something moved outside their safe little alley, the sound of something hitting the ground putting them all on edge. The crocodile took charge again, covering up fear with anger as he gestured wildly to wherever the noise came from. You two, stop standing around with a thumb up your asses and make sure no one wanders here. Get mob. The villain was cut off as a dark thunderbolt crashed onto him, slamming him into the floor. The other villains jumped back in confusion and surprise as the shadow leapt off their self-assigned leader, its tattered cloak billowing as it took a fighting stance. The villains took a second to figure out what just happened, but they barely needed words. Somebody just fell out of the sky and landed on their leader and looked like they wanted to fight. It wasn't rocket science. It's a hero. Let's waste him. The intruder wasn't even paying attention to them, instead, its eyes fixed on the businessman caught up on all this. The businessman was still as stone save for his legs, which were shaking and limp. He wouldn't be running anywhere anytime soon, so just a little more work for it. The villains rushed at once with knives out, charging the singular shadow to cut them down. This wasn't their first fight and they knew Delay, the lead man, wouldn't just go down to some random falling on his head. He wasn't even unconscious yet, it was just a lucky shot. The hero grabbed Delay's body as they walked past him and threw Delay into the charging villains, the collision stopping the charge dead. The criminals stumbled back into each other for a second, their momentum gone. The hero charged into the now disorientated villains. They ran into one of the villains, grabbing him by the head while its legs swept his out to trip him, slamming him into the floor. He was unconscious before he could even scream. The other two villains barely had time to notice before the figure was upon them, hitting the clump of villains with a spinning back kick. The standing villains were both carrying Delay's body and connected to each other, dragging each other down as they fell from one strong kick. The hero ran into the mess of limbs and gave a running punt to Delay, throwing him off the other two and into the wall. Delay staggered to his feet, grabbing the wall for stability as he slowly climbed up before the hero slammed its knee into Dial's head from a full sprint. The knee had the weight of the hero's full charge behind it and staggered Delay. He stumbled back and nearly fell before the hero grabbed him by the shirt and held him up, pinning the villain in place for 2 additional sharp knee strikes to the skull. Delay dropped like a sack of rocks once the hero. No, the figure turned to its next victims. Its face was dark and glossy, devoid of detail save for the damage. Cracks ran across its face, some of the mask torn and broken off. Beneath that was a black bandana that hid its face, but you could still feel the animosity. It stared through that bandana like a predator, and eyes locked on its next two prey. The remaining two villains didn't even try to keep on fighting. They scampered to their feet, turning to the exit of the alley. Bang. The final villain sprinted for the exit of the alley, absolutely terrified. He had no idea what was going on, what he was going to do, or what that thing behind him was. He sprinted toward the street to try and escape. Bang. But was cut off as he was blasted into a wall. He struggled to push off the wall and earned a second and third blast into his back, each shot shoving him back down as the demon slowly approached, each step punctuated by another shot. A cold metallic barrel was pressed against his back, breaking all resistance as the criminal finally gave up. The demon grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back, zip tying them together and then bringing him back to the start of the fight. He gazed up at the demon who had torn through their entire crew in seconds. Its clothes were dark, its form compact, and its motions precise. Most of all, he had no idea who this hero was. They thought they knew all the local heroes from a few days of staking out this ATM, but this guy. What just happened? Sloppy. Midoriya was disgusted with himself as he dragged the remaining criminal. He had wanted to take his suit for a test run, but instead, he was the one getting tested. They'd been too violent. Revenant put the criminal down next to the others and switched focus, checking to make sure they were all right. Revenant hadn't gained a conscience or anything, he was simply annoyed of how inefficient they had just been. Are you all right, sir? Are you injured? Midoriya glanced towards the man as he spoke to let the victim know who he was speaking to, but he didn't get any response from the victim yet. With his hands he checked the unconscious heads, noting the bleeding and judging severity. He took out a cloth in his water bottle, pouring some of the clean water onto the rag then dressing the wounds, cleaning it off before wrapping it in place with gauze. Not perfect, but passable right now. A clear lack of restraint and style, stumbling like infants. That was the same kind of reckless power that Revenant hated heroes for. It was inefficient and a waste of power. I. The victim was still processing what was happening, slowly coming to his senses. He didn't seem to have any injuries, so his problems were more likely to be mental. Nothing they could do to help with that. Revenant finished checking the third criminal already, then moved on to the first one he attacked, the one with the lizard head. Really big mouth, maybe an alligator. At least the scaly skin stopped him from getting any apparent injuries, but under the scale, there might be some problems. He didn't have the equipment or training to check. Midoriya picked up one of the criminal's phones, dialing emergency services then dropping it back on the ground as he checked everyone over one last time. Satisfied that now all the physical threats had been taken care of both the victim and villain alike, he focused all his attention on the victim. He turned to the victim with hands empty and raised slightly to show he wasn't a threat. Are you all right, sir? Are you injured? He approached the man slowly, keeping a steady distance to not seem threatening. The man's eyes were moving as his brain moved, finally catching up before the man nodded suddenly. Midoriya extended a hand and helped the civilian to his feet, giving him the once over as the man finally spoke coherently. I'm fine, thank you. If you hadn't come along. Don't worry about it. Revenant led the man out of the alley and towards the street itself, talking slowly and steadily to keep the man calm. They met the bustling street quickly and Revenant turned to face the man, giving him one last piece of advice before they left. Stay here. The police will be coming soon and they'll want to talk to you. I'm going back into the alley to secure the criminals, but if you see any heroes or police passing by, wave them over. Do you understand? He said it simply and cleanly, keeping eyes locked on the man's as he spoke to make sure his point was getting across. The victim seemed to be a little closer to calm with people nearby, nodding several times and confirming it with his voice even more. Once the man repeated back what he was supposed to do, Midoriya shared a brief smile with the man, giving him one last pat on the shoulder before he turned back into the alley and swept across the criminals. Revenant removed belts from the ones who had them and tied their wrists together with them, thanking the fashion gods that wannabe gangsters wore 10 of the things even if they still couldn't figure out how to keep their pants up. The low-hanging pants seemed like they would get in the way in a fight, but it helped him so he wasn't going to complain. Are you? Eraserhead. Midoriya's head turned as he tied up the final goon, setting the man down so that blood would flow to his head while the gauze made sure as little bled out as possible. The final criminal, who'd been mostly ignored since he never actually received any big hits, was looking at him in confusion, trying to pinpoint who Midoriya was. Maybe I am. Midoriya shook his head, checking the restraints one last time before walking further into the alleyway. With All Might gone, the worlds of heroism and villainy had gone through some big changes. With the number one villain making such a big show and the heroes being caught up in with All Might's loss, small-time crime was on the rise. And what a rise it was. Midoriya walked over to a sewer plate, activating his right gauntlet and going full power to lift the plate up for his gauntlet to do seemingly nothing. He looked down at it, tapped it, then put his hand in front of the gauntlet to test the pull function. The right gauntlet was giving off enough force to pull loose papers off a desk right now, and that was being generous. So this wound up being something of a field test for his kid in the end. Hey wait, don't heroes have to wait for the cops to show up or something? Midoriya crouched down and grabbed the sewer cap, lifting it up to give himself room to get in. Sure they do. If you see any, say hello for me. He slipped down into the sewers, not bothering to put the sewer cap back. The criminal who was still conscious would most likely tell the heroes would come down here to search for him, and he'd just waste his own time. He had bigger things to think about than that anyway. It had been a sloppy fight, but more worryingly, it had been remarkably easy to find. Only 12 minutes from him setting out to getting into the action. Villainy certainly was on the rise, and his time off and recent injuries weren't making him any more prepared for the future. He checked the time, 1:15. That left a little over an hour and a half to kill, and there was nothing to help someone improve like practice. Ronin landed cleanly on the sewer's walkway before taking off into a sprint, reading to start improving. Things had been changing recently, and while the grand scheme of All Might's retirement and the rise of the crime rate was interesting, Midoriya had more personal issues to get through as he went to draw Yamato and instead ran face first into a wall for the third time. He bounced off the grimy wall and nearly fell into the sewage, barely catching himself on the nearby pipe before he took the world's most disgusting bath. He spared a second to look behind himself, rubbing his mask where he collided with the wall like it was his face. Bad muscle memory. Even if Midoriya knew Yamato was broken and he didn't have it, he was so used to having it that he didn't think about it. He had gotten so good at using Yamato to move through the sewers that he didn't need to think about it, but now that was coming to bite him in the ass. Midoriya turned and continued to run down the sewers, taking the long way through the sewers as he made his way to what should be a good exit point for him to get out of the sewers. While his body ran through the sewers, his mind wandered back to the big change that affected him the most, the loss of Yamato. Ronin's speedy movement depended heavily on Yamato. Sure, Midoriya was fast and the suit made him faster, but Yamato let him run through walls. In this maze of sewer tunnels and pipes, that ability alone made him incredibly fast and was why he could outrun heroes so easily. Earlier in his career he had to hide from heroes in the sewers, using the confusing passageways to disorientate and lose his pursuers. With Yamato, though, he didn't need to hide. He could just slash a wall, walk through the wall, then shut the portal behind him. Escaping like that had been trivially easy. Midoriya slowed to a stop as he hit another ladder, taking in his surroundings and making some quick estimations. This should be an alley if he was right, and if he was right and lucky it'd be empty. If it wasn't empty but it was an alley, he'd just stick around for a few minutes until whoever was in it was gone. If it wasn't an alleyway, he could at least figure out where he was. He climbed the rungs quickly and put a hand against the sewer plate, pushing against it to check the weight. He slowly eased it up, holding his breath and keeping a stern grip on the plate to avoid dropping it or making a lot of noise as he peered out. 3 people in suits meandered through the alley, making small talk over cigarettes. Revenant could ponder if they were doing anything suspicious, out and about in an abandoned neighborhood with such fine clothes, but it wasn't his place to judge. He'd instead just sit back and wait for them to pass. Midoriya slunk down the ladder, lowering the sewer cap to rest in its foundations while he hung off the ladder between the alleyway and the sewer. He wrapped an arm around a rung while he listened calmly, content to sit back for a minute while the people above moved. In such silent circumstances, though, his mind tended to wander. Midoriya grabbed his coat and breathed in deeply and immediately regretted it. Even with the helmet covering his face he could tell that he definitely got into something down here in the sewer. One of many reasons most vigilantes stayed out of the sewers. Plus, in a different direction, he could tell why most vigilantes stuck to the rooftops instead of the sewers from today alone. The rooftops were better for maneuverability in pretty much every way imaginable. It was much easier to move with the large space offered by rooftops hands down. There were more directions you could move, not so much stuff in the way, and the path didn't smell like shit. Ronin had overcome this problem by making his own paths with Yamato, but that was in the past. Another problem was finding things. From the rooftops you could look down and take in the scenery, surveying the world and identifying any possible crimes so that you could intercept them. From the sewers, the only way you were going to know of a crime was if someone was in the sewers with you committing it. Ronin had overcome this problem with a variety of things. Police reports, checking the internet, and word of mouth. Plus, Ronin didn't use the sewers to find crimes, he had used the sewers as a way to get to the crimes. With Yamato to pass through walls and he basically had a direct line to anywhere in the city. But, once again, Midoriya couldn't do that anymore. While the sewers would still be his go-to for escaping pursuit, he'd probably have to hunt from the rooftops. He'd picked the sewers in his early days because he didn't know what he was doing, not because of any overly elaborate plan, and now that he lost Yamato he got to realize how terrible traveling through the sewers really was. He peeked again then slid the sewer cap back, slipping out the sewers like a snake. He quickly kicked the cap back over the sewer entrance, checking it was secure before he turned and refocused, immediately back in the action. A large group no, 2 groups of people were in a fight. The 3 people who were above him in the alleyway versus what looked like gangsters. Both sides were using their quirks without care as they recklessly destroyed local property, so it was unlikely either side were pro-heroes. Ronin moved towards the fight and led his entrance in by lobbing a flashbang high and far, throwing it over both sides' heads so neither side would see where it came from. The flashbang went mostly unnoticed until it blindsided both sides, causing a ceasefire as people began to shout and the sides separated. Off to one side, Ronin stood, with Cupid at the ready just in case he needed to do any deterring. He raised the gun as they refocused, firing a single shot into the air. Back off, both of you. Ronin kept a good distance between himself and the fight but spoke loudly. If they wanted to attack him, people with melee quirks would have to rush that gap and anyone with a ranged quirk would have to turn their body to face and aim at him. Both were easy to see coming and react to. I don't care what started this, but you're damaging the surroundings and the threat. Ronin was cut off as someone, one of the men in suits, raised a hand and launched something at him. It was too fast to make out as Ronin moved to the side and raised his gun to counterfire. Hey, we're part of the Shihisakai. Bang. Ronin kept the dialogue short, instead making his rebuttal with an air blast as he kept speaking. I'm not asking, I'm telling, back off. Instead of deterring the criminals not to, however, one of the gangsters turned to look at him. And we're telling you to fuck off, hero. Bang. Another blast to the head, but now at least the 2 sides weren't fighting each other. They were now united but something, and if he was going to guess, it was the fact that 2 of them just got blasted in the head. His quirk's weak as shit. Bust his ass. You're gonna pay, hero. The 2 sides converged at once, charging towards him. They did stop the fight, though. Technically, they just also immediately started a new fight that was much worse than the old one, at least for them. You know, you'd think that after doing this for a year and trying to take the #1 villain on in a straight fight, he'd be a little better at stopping crimes. Ronin stretched his left arm and fingers as the crowd moved to swarm him. There was no use in complaining and no better time than the present to practice stopping crimes, even if he had to practice the forceful method. In a flash, both kindness and Cupid were raised and readied. It was time to get some firing practice. Chapter and notes. Yo yagati yo. This might be the chapter that's taken the longest to ever write, since I had so little effort for it. I'd keep being negative and talk about the problems, but there's a lot of those and they don't really matter. I will say my schoolwork is a lot more difficult this time so my upload schedule's gonna be nerfed by that, but some of this was me. Still, somebody complained about fanfics having really slow and unexplained hiatuses and now he's uploading super slowly, so I guess I can eat shit. In other news, hey. This chapter started life as just writing practice that was going to be uploaded as chapter 2 because I hate not uploading for a while but evolved as my editor came back from the dead, insulted my mess, and made me rethink everything. Now I've spent too long thinking this over. I spent a while trying to work through it and it's done now. Is it good? Fuck no, I wrote it. But I think I'm satisfied with it, at least, more than the last chapter. Enough stuff from the real world though, to the chapter. Gonna start addressing something I've wanted to talk about for a while, Ronin without Yamato. Golden Age Ronin really was tied to Yamato and used it for almost everything, so his operations are going to have to change a lot going forward with its new absence. I've said it before, but Yamato was never intended to last. It's just too broken, making everything extremely easy in the beginning for an aspiring idiot. Now though we get to see how Midoriya handles without it, and we see he's still not perfect. What a twist. So begins the new start to Ronin, almost literally as he has to get used to life as a vigilante without it. Should be interesting if I don't fuck it up, but my name is Garbageo Bag, so trash is my specialty. Till we meet again and I figure out what this weird thing called pacing is, adios. Chapter 163. Chapter summary. A normal fight with a lot of technical issues. Which is actually normal, so this is a normal squared fight. Bet you didn't expect math in this summary. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Ronin weaved between the quirks and bodies, punishing every missed attack with a blast from his hand cannons. A punk charged straight at him and ate a front kick straight to the mouth, then 6 shots from each of his guns blew the punk backward. The punk flipped head over heels, crashing to the ground, but was replaced by 2 more in an instant. Two gangsters rushed while one of the Yakuza took aim at Ronin, launching a projectile with his quirk. Ronin didn't bother to analyze as he moved into the rushing gangsters, tackling them while shoving the pistol's barrels into their stomachs and put a charged shot into each. The two rushers were blown back while Ronin danced back, pushed by his own shot as he slid backward and avoided the Yakuza's shot. Ronin shook his arms, which ached from using so much force at once, then. Midoriya was taken by surprise as a long arm grabbed him by his coat, then dragged him back into the fight. One of the gangsters' arms had extended out like a lasso to grab him and was now pulling him in while another gangster got ready with a bat to give Midoriya's face a remodeling. Midoriya tried to resist for a moment, finding out that his Beowulf boots just didn't work because of course they didn't before leaning into it. Revenant didn't even try to holster the guns, dropping both as he reached into the coat. Revenant ran along the ground and grabbed the arm that pulled him along to make sure it couldn't move as he drew a slim silver needle and rammed it into the gangster's arm, right underneath the wrist. The grip on his coat instantly slipped as the man screamed in pain, but Revenant kept his anchor-like grip on the retracting arm as he was pulled forward. The gangster with the bat was still ready to crack Ronin's head in as they flew forward, stepping into the attack for a wide swing with no defenses. A needle flew through the air and struck the batter in the forehead, piercing the skin but not breaking the bone. The man stumbled back, screaming with his eyes closed. He began to swing wildly trying to find purchase on anything in his fury, stumbling around in the background. The arm pulling Ronin along fully retracted, dragging Ronin all the way to the man with the extendo arms. Ronin used the momentum of getting reeled in to deliver a heavy kick to Extendo, finally letting go of Extendo's arm and launching the gangster backward into his friends. Extendo flew back and crashed into Batman, immediately getting hit upside the head as Batman turned all of his aggression against the first person he could find. I got him. Ronin delivered a heavy punch into Batman's stomach, doubling him over as he dropped the bat. Ronin then weaved back to kick the man in his now lowered head and instead got shot in the side. No, I got him. The Yakuza with the ranged quirk smirked as he took a metal screw out of his pocket and made it float in his hand, lining up his next shot while Ronin staggered back, gripping his side. They never bothered to replace the bulletproof plates in their coat. Right now, they were susceptible to heavy blunt forces. Ronin finished up his introspection as he jumped back, now focusing on the Yakuza in question for just a second before he had to dodge getting crushed by a lamp pole. One of the Yakuza lifted the lamp pole up again, snarling as his shirt fell to pieces and exposed massive blue muscles beneath his skin. Generic strength quirk, probably supplemented with enhanced durability. The first Yakuza who caught Ronin's attention was still aiming his next shot, making the screw float as he lined it up. Magnetism, telekinesis, whatever the case. You're first. Ronin finished rubbing his ribs and stood up, reaching into his coat and throwing a needle straight at the ranged quirk user, disrupting the Yakuza's focus as he was forced to dodge. The strong Yakuza's entire body turned blue as he pulled back the light post, taking a second swing at Ronin since the vigilante had been standing still for so long. The Yakuza swung the post sideways like a traditional baseball swing and swept across the road, hitting a massive area with one strike. Instead of doing the suicidal thing and trying to tank the hit, Ronin jumped out of it and rode it. Ronin jumped the same way the swing was moving, letting himself be hit in the arms while crossing his arms to try and diffuse as much of the force as possible. He still got fucking launched like a baseball, but it hurt a lot less until he crashed into a building. Yeah no, I think we're doing most of the work here. One of the Yakuza complained to the gangsters who were still conscious, which wasn't a very big number anymore. Fuck you, we're doing our best. Batman picked up his bat and shook it at the Yakuza, then made his way over to the human-shaped hole in the wall that Ronin had excused himself from, peering his head inside. Seriously, what a dick. A single hand grabbed him from inside, pulling him out of sight while the villains got back to arguing. Have any of you idiots even hit this guy? You say you own this turf but you can't even deal with one hero. Suck a dick man. At least all of us are doing something. The fuck's that guy been doing? The gangster pointed to the last Yakuza, who'd been on the phone over since the original fight between the Yakuza and the gangsters started. Wait, do we even have to keep teaming up? One of the gangsters raised the point then gestured to the hole. Hero's dead, isn't he? The Yakuza and gangsters took a moment to think this over, looking at their teammates then each other before they all turned to face each other again. AHHHHHHHH. Batman flew into the middle of them, disrupting them again as Ronin limped out of the hole, rubbing his now aching back. Fuck, every one of you. Midoriya stretched, feeling his back pop several more times as he walked into the light. Me especially Ice Am. Both sides pivoted back to face him at once and continued to charge right as the flashbangs on Batman went off, blinding everyone except the stretching vigilante. Midoriya took a few more seconds to work his left shoulder, making sure everything was alright while the criminals once again misfired and panicked. This time he stretched properly, getting both of his legs nice and warmed up so he didn't pull anything. Getting knocked into a building reminded him that pain was a bitch, something he didn't think he'd forget but here he was. Damn, his stupidity was the shit of legend some days. Maybe he had a concussion. When the criminals got more control over themselves they charged in again, but Midoriya was still taking things slowly. He worked his shoulders again, swinging both his arms back and forward like a bird flapping as he stretched his pecs and shoulder blades. One of the criminals charged forward, eager to get a piece, but Midoriya wasn't ready for him. He pulled out a third grenade and threw it straight down while taking a few casual steps back, then got back to working his left arm again. Seriously, his shoulder was hurting again. Maybe he'd need to check in with a doctor or something. The criminals all flinched the moment they saw the grenade and all covered their eyes, a little wiser to the vigilante's tactics this time. Because of this none of them actually saw the smoke bomb go off, or where the vigilante went as he casually walked into the noxious smoke still stretching his bad arm. The smoke bomb spread fast and wide, filling the street with thick noxious smoke in seconds and creating a wall between vigilante and villains. The villains who rushed in came to a stop, coughing, and slowly retreated out of the smoke. What hero is this? Ninja. No, you idiot. The shooter called over to the large blue Yakuza. Takeo, blow it away. A wave of fire emerged from the smoke cloud, hitting the shooter's center mass and knocking him backward. Once the shooter had started talking he'd been easy to target, but using this weapon was still difficult, and aiming it was a pain in the ass. He couldn't tell if he got a direct hit, missed, or just clipped his target. The large blue Yakuza followed his buddy's last orders, swinging the lamppost wildly with wide arcs to create gusts. The massive winds blew back smoke, revealing the vigilante who'd hidden inside the dark space. Now, instead of holding more needles or grenades, the figure had a long pole held in two hands. He held it loosely, still working his left shoulder as he stood tall. No guard, no running, just a confident stance against all of them. You're dead, punk. Little boy blue rushed with his pole while Ronin adjusted his, setting it to max power. Both stepped into their attacks, pulling back their respective poles, and swung with all their might. D-I-I-I-I-E. Big Blue brought the pole in from the side since it hit the vigilante last time while Ronin went for a mirror of his opponent, their swings identical as they flew towards each other until, at the last moment, Ronin activated Rita. The pole flared to life creating a massive axe head of blue flames on the tip, superheating the air as it chopped the lamp pole in half with one motion. The upper half of the pole flew overhead as Big Blue stared at his now much shorter weapon, taking a single shaky step backward with eyes fixed on the molten end of his lamp pole. Well, shit, Ronin then turned his axe to point at his target, pulling the pole back for a second swing. The large Yakuza turned the pole to try and block while Ronin took aim, lining up his next swing while he turned down the power. Ronin stepped into his swing again while the Yakuza and gangsters pulled back, vaguely aware of what might happen if they got hit by that. He swung the axe sideways, his body spinning slightly as he swung to get as much power and reach into his attack as possible before cutting power to the axe head. Instead of extinguishing, however, the axe head was launched from the polearm, turning into a wave of fire that continued towards the retreating criminals. The wave of flames took several of them by the back, causing shouts and screams as they were blasted forward. Ronin advanced, flipping the polearm around to switch weapons. Big Blue staggered forward, more confident now that he had survived the fire unsinged. He really was a little more durable than the rest, charging in with a scream while the rest were still in pain. Little Boy Blue lobbed what was left of the lamppost at Ronin, then charged straight after it. Ronin sidestepped the hurtling mass of metal, pointing the pole's tip at the charging villain as he took a sideways stance. His grip switched from an axe grip to a traditional spear style, bracing for the incoming impact. The large villain loomed over him, preparing to crush him with both hands while Ronin stepped forward and poked him with the pole. There was no weight in the attack and barely any speed as the tip poked the villain, giving him a moment of pause before Ronin clicked the button to turn Tenbokiri on. There was a moment where nothing happened as the villain lunged forward before the electric spearhead formed inside the villain's stomach, acting more as a taser than a knife as it shocked the villain. The large Yakuza's attack was thrown to chaos as the volt surged through his body, with the power slowly increasing as Ronin kept the pole rammed firmly into the criminal's stomach. The criminal quickly went limp, slumping on Ronin's body. Ronin gave a quick listen to the man's chest to make sure his heart was still beating before shoving the now turned off pole tip into the Yakuza, pushing him off while Ronin moved backward in case anyone else wanted a piece of him. And want a piece of him those gangsters did, for some reason. The last four rushed him again, possibly as vengeance for the axe thing earlier. It didn't matter. Ronin wondered why he didn't use the spear and axe more as he pushed the button, readying his pole. And then looking down in confusion, pressing the button again but with no result. The spearhead wasn't coming out. Shit. Ronin then took on the charging gangsters, using the pole's superior reach to ram the shaft of the pole into one's stomach while he continued to back up. He then stabbed next to one of the gangsters' heads, missing on purpose before pushing down on the pole and pushing the gangster's head down. As the gangster's head fell, it was met by Ronin's quickly rising knee. Knee met nose and something had to give. Ronin stopped pushing down on the man's head with his pole, letting up and then whacking him backward with another spear strike to the head, slamming the spear into the side of the man's head and throwing him back into his friends. The advance of the gangsters was slowed as they became tangled with each other, giving Ronin time to flip his polearm and activate the axe head, which flickered to life for a second before also going out. Low battery. Either way, shit. Ronin focused as the gangsters disentangled themselves, Ronin charging in and taking the momentum before the gangsters could. He pulled the cane back like it had the axe head still and cracked it across one of the gangsters' faces, then moved on to taking care of one with his legs under him. It was difficult to pull off some of his stronger moves on someone who was on the floor, especially on a time crunch and with multiple opponents, so Ronin instead focused on one who was getting to his feet. Ronin shoved the polearm into the gangster's stomach, winding him, then flicked the staff up. The staff hit the gangster again in the chest, forcing him upright as Ronin hit him with a barrage of thrusts. He stumbled back as Ronin steadily advanced, making constant strong hits aimed at the stomach and chest. It took 12 before the criminal's defenses entirely broke and Ronin took a power shot straight into the man's skull, sending him crashing to the ground. Ronin then spun on a dime, turning 180 degrees and leading in with a side kick. One of the gangsters who had crept up behind Ronin ate the kick to the ribs and doubled over, putting his head right in range of Ronin's knee. Ronin put the pole behind the man's head to anchor the gangster in as he performed 3 quick knee strikes, also to the skull, ending with a front kick to shove the man back. He was unconscious before he even hit the ground. Ronin backed up, checking his 6 quickly before focusing on the remaining gangsters. Or gangster, who was running away. There was also no sign of the third Yakuza, the guy who hadn't actually bothered to fight, and since he didn't see where the third guy went he couldn't chase. Midoriya broke his stance to lean backward, feeling a few more pop into place as he slowly breathed out. His bodysuit was good, but after the shit he'd been through it might need a few more repairs before it was good enough to get lobbed through walls like it was nothing. He was tired. Midoriya walked back through the mess, picking up the 2 guns he dropped back at the start and holstering one, then using one blast from kindness to put the last gangster on his ass. Midoriya strolled up to this final criminal slowly, taking care to pin the gangster down with another shot anytime he tried to get up and run away. Some more zip ties to keep him locked in place, and most of Midoriya's work here was done. He took phones off the criminals and gave them zip tie handcuffs in return, dialing in the police and heroes then leaving the phones on the ground so they could be easily tracked. He spent the last of his time to herd everyone together and out of the road, giving everyone one last checkup before he leaned back and took a minute to breathe. He checked his ribs that the ranged Yakuza had hit earlier. Tender, sore, but not broken. Midoriya rubbed that spot as he checked the time again. He still had over an hour until crafting club, but after that fight, it was probably as good a time as ever to get back to school. One last check to make sure he knew where he was before he went back to the sewers, planning his route out while moving the sewer cap out of the way. He took one last look down the hole, took one last breath of clean air, then hopped down and took off running. He had a lot of work to do, and no time to waste. He walked down the street slowly, leisurely checking his phone as he went. These streets sure were confusing, but roadwork was very important in this line of work. It was important to never forget your roots. He nearly walked straight past the group until someone called out to him. Sir, over here, sir. He put away his phone and turned, looking first at his subordinate and then the scene behind him, blinking a few times as he processed it. This is quite the mess. Several people unconscious on the sidewalk, face down, with their arms neatly crossed behind them and zip-tied in place. The zip ties were all running the same way, with the tails all point to the right. Very orderly, but zip ties weren't the work of pro heroes. Neither was leaving people unattended like this. Well, it's a clean mess at least. What happened? A fight with a villain. At the start, sir. His subordinate directed him towards some of the unconscious people. A fight with some gangsters, a dispute over product. Then a vigilante came in and interrupted it. One vigilante. He crouched over the bodies, adjusting his mask. Against this many people? Yes, sir. His subordinate stood behind him, still holding the suitcase with the product. They didn't lose anything here, it seemed, except for time. But maybe learning of the presence of a new factor was worth that time. He dealt with them all in a minute company. A minute, you say? He glanced up, smiling as two new figures walked into the scene. Judging by the spandex, heroes. Hello, did you two get called in for this as well? Yup, a whole bunch of no-named calls came in all at once from this place. One of the heroes agreed with a smile, both heroes walking next to him to look over the bodies. Sheesh, hate to meet the guy who did this. He noticed the burn across one of the Yakuza's fronts, a line that cut across his shirt and slightly scorched the skin underneath. His shirt was burned at the cut. A fire quirk. Any idea who this might have been? These days, who knows? The other hero was more dour, taking out a cigarette and lighting it. Disgusting, didn't he know how bad that was for your health? So many villains these days and we're up to our eyeballs in shit like this. Could be Knuckleduster. He's a big violent guy, he could take this many. Maybe Yakuza Hunter, some of these guys look like his prey. A quick glance at his subordinate told him neither of these were the right answers. Most people worth their salt knew Knuckleduster, a household name at this point for people in the business, and Yakuza Hunter had quickly become infamous overnight. The other hero confirmed his thoughts and his subordinate's doubts. Not violent enough to be either of them. Could be Ronin. He's got a huge turf, and I think he's done zip ties before. His subordinate didn't shake his head this time. Ronin. Yes, he was sure of it. That name meant nothing to him. Yet. Ronin. I'll have to remember that going forward. Remember to investigate this Ronin once we bring these guys back in, he said to his subordinate, then rose off his haunches to his full height, careful to dust the dirt off his pants. He peeled off a glove as he stood, turning to the heroes and offering a hand. I don't think we've met before. Ah, no we haven't. The lively hero laughed, grabbing his outstretched hand. I'm Bounce Man. Splat, splat. He pulled his hand back, quickly wiping it off to remove the large filth. He then put hand sanitizer on, finishing by putting an all-new glove on his hand. He didn't bother to look at the two red splotches that were once the first responder heroes as he walked away with his subordinate in tow, carrying his two unconscious subordinates. Overhaul. It truly was a pleasure. Chapter and notes. Yo, holy shit, this was fun but took forever to write. Been writing for 6 hours. Okay, maybe it wasn't that long and I'm just an impatient little shit. Sue me, joke's on you, I live on Pluto and therefore your Earth laws can't affect me here, sucker. Diplomatic immunity or something. Get nay nod. This was just a fun time with a fun fight, and definitely no foreshadowing of the next arc since I'm skipping the provisional license exam. It's fun to see that most of Ronin still having problems in his fights, keeps them more interesting. Equipment fails, lapses in judgment, all fun mix-ups to change the formula and keep everyone on their toes. Especially with his tech and body both needing improvement, giving us something to work with going forward. Still, we're gonna have some time to fix that kit. For a chapter that was so short a lot of work went into this, so hope you enjoyed it. I did, so now, it's time to bail. Adios. Chapter 164. Chapter summary. Rest and relaxation without the relaxing. Or the resting, because this is Ronin and he isn't smart enough to pace himself. Just like some other dumbass. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya ran through the sewers after that god-awful fight on his part, making his way down the familiar tunnels back to his school and club building with a slight limp in his step from his sore back. He had over an hour until it was time for school clubs, but with his sloppy performances, it was probably for the best to wrap up early so he could just sit for a minute or 10. Part of the day's bad performances could be blamed on Yamato, or more specifically, its absence. When Ronin had Yamato he rarely had to switch to other weapons. The other weapons, his parkour, even Midoriya's martial arts were more supplementary to Yamato than independent. It used to all come down to Yamato, the magic bullshit sword that could do everything. Opening portals to teleport and attack, safely cutting off and reattaching limbs for easy wins, and being able to phase through walls. Yamato really had been broken. His fighting style naturally came to rely on it like a boxer relied on their gloves. It was an important part of who Ronin had been, but now that it was gone Ronin would have to rebuild. Speaking of rebuilding things though, Midoriya glanced down at the junk hanging off his body. So much of his equipment was damaged that it might be a while before Ronin made his next appearance. The bodysuit, boots, and one of the gauntlets had sustained so much damage they couldn't do their original purposes anymore. Those would probably be the first things he'd fix. Midoriya came to a sliding stop beneath his school in the school's bathroom, the way he usually got in and out of the building without anyone seeing. And broke fruitless for Yamato for a second. He looked down slowly, wiggling his fingers for a second before he broke out of stance and shook his head at himself, sighing. Normally no, formerly he had used Yamato to make a portal through the boys' bathroom straight into the sewers and back, giving him a great hidden way in and out of school in seconds. Now though. Midoriya rubbed the back of his head as he held up his flashlight, squinting in the dim light it provided as he started to meander around the sewer path scanning the walls for a ladder out of this place. Where the hell's a sewer access when you need one? His equipment was stored away in various places inside the club room, ready to be fixed in the upcoming days. Midoriya sat back in a chair, quietly working on one of his boots. He undid the stitches slowly but steadily, taking apart one of the boots so he could better assess and fix them. The room was quiet, and it felt nice. A far different pace from most things going on these days. The door to the club room was eased open slowly as a quiet figure peered in, blocking the entire exit before she opened the door a little more and slipped in silently, before shutting it a little too hard and disrupting the quiet with the crash of a door. Good to see you, Eiko. Midoriya didn't even bat an eye at the sudden noise, pulling out one last stitch before setting his work down and giving Eiko his full attention. He smiled, unperturbed by the door. Thanks for bringing my stuff to me earlier, it's a big help. It's nothing. Eiko bowed once, still a little on edge from her slip-up before she put her bag on the table, then went around the room to get her own project. Her fashion choice was pretty similar to the last time Midoriya saw her, only wearing one coat instead of the dozens she had when they first met. Her hair was draped over her shoulders, showing her mouth but still hiding her eyes. She seemed to have something on her mind as she opened up, taking lead on the conversation, or what could barely be considered a conversation. So, my dad said you were in the hospital. We came by to look and it looked pretty bad. Are you all right now? Midoriya was surprised for a moment that she came to visit him and flashed her a smile. His back ached, his ribs stung, and his face was sore from face planting into sewer walls, but getting better every moment. And you, how's the treatment going? You're looking pretty good these days. Eiko had naturally white skin like her mother, but when they had first met, Eiko looked more like the dead than the living due to some bad side effects of her quirk. With a few treatments from the hospital, though, she was already looking a lot better. More energetic too. Good. I had to over the summer, and I got to go out a lot more for a lot longer. Eiko once spent most of the day sleeping due to blood problems carried over from her quirk, the same problems that her hospital trips were fixing. He wasn't sure what exactly they did, but judging by the changes to Eiko he'd gotten to see, they seemed to be working. The two dissolved into speaking over their summer vacations with a lot less crafting and a lot more clubbing, in the craft club. While it wasn't the most efficient use of his time and he didn't even finish the one boot he'd been working on, Midoriya did enjoy it for some reason he couldn't quite place. Minutes of slow talk soon turned into hours, and before Midoriya noticed club time was over. The school was supposed to be closing soon, not that a rundown place like this actually did, but it was going to be time for dinner soon. While Midoriya was content to sit around for another 4 hours and finish this one boot, Eiko was looking pretty tired. She might have been getting treatment for her quirk's negative side effects, she wasn't cured yet. She still got tired quickly and still needed a lot of sleep, and if Midoriya remembered correctly she hadn't slept in class. Now though, she was doing her best to stay focused as they put their things away. Busy day today. It was unusual for Eiko to stay awake this long. Usually, she slept through at least some of their classes since this chaotic mess of a school barely had any supervision, but she had stayed up for some reason. He didn't know why, so the best way forward was just to ask. Yeah, real, she yawned, then rubbed her eyes. Really busy. Really good too, though. It was worth it. Eiko let her words fade out as she stared at her partially finished project, a strange patchwork of cloth and stitches that Midoriya couldn't even begin to unravel or understand, then turned towards him with a soft smile. But what about you? How's your day been? His day. Now that was a real mess of patchwork he wasn't sure anyone could unravel. He had a lot of difficulties and problems, but on the flip side, he figured out a lot of problems he needed to fix going forward. Plus he got to talk to a good friend for the first time in a while. He didn't want to say a direct lie, so he thought over his day one last time before speaking. Today's been pretty informative. I learned a lot. Did something happen in class? Did we finally get a lecture and I missed it? I thought I was awake the whole time. Eiko started to panic briefly before Midoriya stepped in to cut her off. It seemed she really was good at activating her fear-based quirk, even to her own detriment. No, just some stuff in my own time after lunch. Midoriya passed Eiko some of the tools to put away, still reflecting over his day. A lot's changed recently, and I'm working through how to deal with it all. It seems I'm not as strong as I thought I was. Have you tried talking to someone about it? Eiko and Midoriya walked out of the classroom, only stopping for Midoriya to lock up the club room and making a beeline for the faculty office to turn in the key. Whenever I'm having problems with stuff, I talk to my dad. He doesn't always get it, but he tries his best and it really helps me. Being honest with someone can really help. Midoriya smiled, thinking about Eiko's dad for a moment before thinking about his own father. Quote. I haven't talked to anyone about this yet. I might try my dad, but I'm not sure how much he'll be able to help. Midoriya stopped dead as they walked out of the school building, his thoughts racing as he started to put things together. Well, if he can't. I'll do my best. Eiko misinterpreted Midoriya's silence and gave him a shaky thumbs up and smile while Midoriya's brain started to tick at its old speed. Yes, there was someone who could help. Eiko, you're a genius. Midoriya snapped his head up and shot her a genuine confident smile, then began to run towards his house. Thanks for the help. I'll see you tomorrow. You're welcome. Thanks. Thanks. Eiko stood bewildered for a second then smiled, unsure of what it actually was she'd done but glad to help, then began making her own way home to try and think about what she actually did. Midoriya ran all the way without stopping, only slowing to crush a single gang in seconds. There was a definite excitement in his motions as he went on his way, his head running a mile a minute as he thought it all through. He had a lot of problems, sure. That much was obvious and overstated, but his problems all came from a lot of directions. Sure, there were the recent problems that literally happened today. Technical malfunctions, injuries, and his movement all came up at once. But there were more problems than the recent ones, problems that preceded Yamato's loss. Like him. Physically, he wasn't that strong. Skill-wise, he couldn't do much other than attack and some light first aid that he learned in a week. And when talking about attacking, he still didn't know any real sword skills beyond what the internet taught him, and most of his other fighting styles were at a similar level. Or worse. All in all, the weakest part of Ronin was the Mano, the kid beneath the mask. His vigilantism had always been a little messy, but Yamato let him get away with it. Yamato had served as a crutch, allowing for bad habits to build. Now, without it, he could see a way forward. No longer could he be so sloppy, and he did know someone he could talk to about it. Midoriya took the steps up to his apartment 2 at a time, running his plan through his head. He unlocked the door quickly, stopping only to give his mom a large hug on the way to his room. He ditched his coat onto his bed and kicked off his shoes without abandon, placing his bag beside his desk and sinking into his chair, taking a second to breathe while relaxing his body. He wasn't going to talk to his actual father. They spoke once a week at most, and even so, his father was an office worker. What would he know about Midoriya's kind of problems? How often did his father get into massive fights? No, Midoriya tried to get someone else, and he had a pretty good idea of who he wanted already. Someone who he was pretty sure was good at martial arts. Someone who wouldn't mind giving him a hand. Most of all, like Eiko said, someone he could be honest with. Completely honest. Midoriya sat down at his desk, pulling out Ronin's boots and his own phone. He could keep working on the boots while on the call. He flipped through his contacts with one hand while he pulled out more parts of his boots. Mom, Dad, Bakugo, why the fuck do I? Midoriya stopped for a second, contemplating deleting it, then realized how many ways he could use this to annoy that dick later and kept scrolling through his contacts. He even double-checked, but he couldn't find the name. Oh, I'm a dipshit. Midoriya laughed for a second as he selected the main man, setting his phone to speaker, and got to work as the phone rang twice before being picked up. Chapter and notes. Yo. No yig this time cause this chapter short and I'll try to make the summary match, then fail because this is an Eiko chapter. Let's get straight into it. Eiko's back, which is always fun for me at least in a very roundabout and confusing way. I've mentioned before that I have a lot of difficulties writing some of these chapters, but that usually depends on how I'm feeling that day. Not with Eiko. Eiko is always a challenge, no matter what. Eiko's so difficult because her personality is so different from mine. It's difficult for me to get into her headspace as a writer, and that's not good if you want to make a character feel real. The challenge for me comes in the fact that I really like her as a concept and don't want to mess it up. So the fun comes from trying to go beyond my abilities and create a character wildly different from me. This chapter took over 20 hours to make if you count all the time I spent trying to think through the 2 tiny scenes with Eiko in them, which is way more time than I spent thinking over the last chapter. Big oof, but I got through and I think it's at least pretty average, which means I didn't fail too badly. Let me know in the comments how bad I really did so I can read your ideals and steal themey mean fix the chapter later. Eventually. When I get around to it. Like when I get around to fixing chapter 1. Okay, that's enough introspection, time to bail. Adios. Chapter 165. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya nodded and mumbled along with the voice coming out of his phone as he worked on his boots. The phone's camera wasn't on, so his nodding was pointless, but at this point it was more subconscious than intentional as he absentmindedly tried and failed to focus. He wasn't even sure what he was trying to do with these boots anymore. So it was a great time to wrap things up. There was no point in continuing if he didn't know what he was doing. Revenant took a deep breath to clear his mind and set down a boot and his tools, taking a second to rub his eyes and try to refocus. Someone was going to bed early. Revenant picked up the noisy phone, switching speaker mode off and holding it next to his head so he could speak seriously and finalize tomorrow's meeting. Yeah, I know where that is seriously. There. Midoriya blinked, then rubbed his eyes, wondering just how tired he really was. Nope, he heard the right meetup location. As stupid as it was. Earliest I can get there. 12:30, at best. Alright, thanks again. Yeah, we can swing by and pick it up. Midoriya checked the time, pursing his lips. Only 7. It felt like he'd been awake for days. Yup, see ya soon, jackass. Midoriya hung up the phone, tired, but even the poor illumination of the room couldn't hide his smirk. He leaned back in his chair, sliding the phone across the table with casual disregard while he closed his eyes again. He was content just to go to sleep right then and there. He should have been working on the boots right now, but his heart just wasn't in it. He didn't have the right mindset right now, so he'd just close his eyes for a minute. Izuku, dinner's ready. Well, there was another reason not to work on the boots. He'd do it tomorrow if he had the time. Coming. Midoriya slid forward, attempting to jump out of his chair and immediately regretting it as his ribs and back screamed in protest. The injuries from his scuffle with the Yakuza and gangsters were a little more serious than he first thought, with how bad of condition the bodysuit was in. Revenant was right, somebody definitely would be going to bed. It's Katsuden. Right after he had some of that Katsuden. The rest of the night was blur. Dinner was fine, nothing amazing, but it was his favorite food and the conversation made it even better. After eating, Midoriya stuck to his plan, for once, and went straight to sleep. And before he knew it, his alarm was ringing. The night seemed to drag on forever when he was working, sure, but try to enjoy it and relax and it was gone in an instant. Midoriya struggled out of his warm and comfy prison, shaking off his covers and starting his morning stretches on the floor. Everything was still a blur as he went through the motions, his brain not totally awake yet. A quick cleanup and a quicker breakfast, then Midoriya was out and about on the road. He took the steps down out of his apartment 3 at a time, gliding down the stairs and floors in a minute before he hit the pavement. He was starting to wake up seriously now. Midoriya was used to moving at a fast pace constantly. From elementary school onward he'd been constantly harassed by everyone, so he got used to needing to keep one ear to the ground and one eye open at all times. He needed to rush to stay one step ahead and stay safe, or to try to get to some semblance of safety. Being a vigilante built off that fast foundation. He had to be in constant motion to stay ahead, to stay strong, and to stay alive. Vigilantism seemed almost like a natural evolution of his previous hellscape, like he was destined for it. What kind of hero could make use of his skills? But there was a problem with his lifestyle. Life in the fast lane was dangerous, sure, but that was as obvious as the sun. There were more subtle problems with the lifestyle of a vigilante. Something was moving quickly towards him. Revenant snapped out of his thoughts and into focus, sliding naturally into a defensive stance and moving out of the way. Someone was running towards him, about to crash into him. Dodge at the last second, then hit them with a counter to bring them down, right in the stomach. Get them to double over, then hit their unprotected head. Midoriya snapped out of focus, his guard drooping for a second as the fast-moving person ran straight past him, only running into his now limp shoulder. It was just a girl in a middle school uniform, scrambling with her bag and a piece of toast in her mouth. Major Bumsville, I'm so late. Midoriya turned a little more to watch the schoolgirl run past him, her golden pigtails flying through the air as she crashed down the street like a hurricane, smiling and shaking his head at the youth before turning forward and dropping his guard entirely. He took one deep breath to clear his head, shaking his head as he refocused and kept moving forward, trying not to think of how he nearly bodied some random schoolgirl. The problem he was thinking of and focusing on was pretty simple. Once you stepped into the fast lane, it was hard to slow down. Midoriya had a hard time relaxing and actively had to force himself not to run. His eyes naturally flicked around, looking for anything dangerous. He adjusted the bags on his shoulder, keeping one hand free at all times if he needed it. His feet danced away from others naturally, always ready to jump back at just the drop of a hat. Vigilantism had given him great senses and greater paranoia. It wasn't paranoia when it saved your ass from gangsters, but it was when it made everything look like a fight. He had a hard time doing anything that wasn't vigilantism these days. This wasn't a new problem for the teen, it was just the evolved form of his fixation on heroes and quirks. But even if it wasn't new, it probably wasn't great. Midoriya was now fully awake and focused, but purposely slowed himself down. He took his time with every step as he made his way down the road, taking in the scenes. He forced his free hand into his pocket and took deep breaths, putting on a smile as he meandered to school. It was time to slow down, even if just a smidge. He arrived at school early still. Habits were habits, and he couldn't seem to force himself to be slow enough. Midoriya ducked into the crafting club room to ditch his boots and check where everything was. He'd need some things from his costume now, he'd get them later. He had plenty of time, plus, he'd come back to the club room for lunch. There was no need to rush. Midoriya took one more second to look around the room. It had gotten dirty and dusty during the summer and there was some cleaning due, and judging by how messy the rest of the school was, only one person was going to get that done. Midoriya nodded to himself to at least try and remember it for later before he closed the door and headed to class, the third person to arrive once again even with his detour. Gradually, some of the students of Ishiyama's 1A trickled in. There had never been as many since the first day, except maybe for test day when a whole bunch of people showed up just to fail if the test results were anything to go by. Most of the students were somewhere on campus, they just didn't bother actually coming to class and instead bummed around with their friends. Midoriya didn't think about them much other than trying to avoid them, but maybe he should take a note from them and skip a few classes. He was already done with all his schoolwork till finals, so all he had to do was review and get ready for the future. He lost more than he gained by being stuck in classes. But on the other hand, his reputation as a goody two-shoes was pretty good. Coming to school, getting all the work done, then sticking around even when he didn't have anything else to learn was a great cover for his after-hour job. Still, it wasn't a great use of his time. Revenant's eyes slid from their phone to his bag and, more specifically, the dozens of needles kept inside. They could get a lot of work done right now regardless of how they felt. They didn't need to be in a creative mood, whatever the hell that meant, if they knew what they wanted to do. They'd just follow the plan and achieve the expected results. They wouldn't go above and beyond, but they didn't need to right now. They weren't trying to reinvent the wheel, they had some boots that didn't work and they were gonna make them work again. Still, he didn't need to go above and beyond but he would like to. Midoriya wanted to always improve, as unrealistic as that was, or at the very least he always wanted to try and do better. Was that why he was so bad at following plans? Probably. His ego and second-guessing made him doubt the plan and abandon it at the last minute when it was too late to come up with a new plan, and instead, they had to run by the seat of their oversized clown pants. Midoriya chuckled at Revenant's. No, at his own lame joke. His attention shifted from his main book bag to a second bag. A large duffel bag that was mostly empty right now, save for the training gear he'd bought for later. Some clothes, a couple of water bottles, nothing special. He'd need it later, but before he went off to training, he'd swing by the club room again to pick up a few extras. So now it was just the waiting game. Midoriya sighed, bored, but there was little he could do to stop it. He could try to find things to pass the time, some phone games. He took one look at his phone battery and decided to turn it off until he really needed it and instead focused on the room around him. The same dull classroom as ever, in constant disrepair, with the same graffiti piled up over the years. He could still find the spray paint cans from the first day of class, lying in the corner of the room, untouched for so long. Man, he was really bored if he was contemplating the history of spray cans. Next Midoriya turned his attention to the other people in the room, the Gyarus and fashionistas, who were really the only groups who still came to the classroom. The two groups sat on opposite ends of the classroom, pulling chairs and desks over to talk all while glaring daggers at the other group but doing some mix of jack and shit. The other two groups were long gone, as far as Midoriya knew. The fitness freaks mostly went to clubs while the delinquents skipped, hanging around the school in various places to do whatever delinquents did. Midoriya wasn't really an expert on small crime at that small of a level. Smoking, fighting, maybe drugs. Fuck if he knew. There were some oddballs of course. He was one of them, obvious facts were obvious, and Eiko was too, sitting in the back of the classroom. She was still slowly chewing through the year's homework of her own, but she did seem to be catching up. If you could catch up when no one else was started. A few teachers and students came and left randomly, but Midoriya didn't think they were part of 1A. Though the teachers might have been. Halfway through his first year and he only knew one of his teachers. Now, that was impressive. Revenant leaned over his desk, resting his head in his hands as he stopped scanning the room. He could keep sighing in boredom. But that wasn't his style. He checked the time. 3 hours till lunch, plus 30 more minutes for lunch, then he was home free. Those 30 minutes they could enjoy, but the 3 hours. Well, he'd find something to do. Revenant drew out an old and burned notebook, flipping through the pages with one hand and spinning his pencil between his fingers until he reached the most edited page. A rough sketch made long before the name Ronin was even a thought in their head. The first name was still written above the sketch, albeit faded. It took a little bit of squinting, but it was still legible. Ratman, hero of the sewers. Below that forgotten name, a crude drawing of some vaguely humanoid figure with terrible proportions. A blank dark mask, a big coat, and a bodysuit. The form carried a sword at its hip, but other weapons were slowly added around this artistic abomination. Midoriya smiled at this first draft and flipped the pages until he got into the more recent stuff. He said he wanted to go above and beyond on those boots, so he might as well start working out those details. Now, maybe he'd start with rebuilding the wiring. With something to finally do and Miroya's mind preoccupied, the hours seemed to slip by. What started out as just planning how to fix his boots gradually grew into reworks for Ronin's entire outfit, with a few things he'd have to try out separately from the main costume. He might even dust off the old Ranger and Yakuza Hunter costumes just to try some of his ideas. But that was later, and as the bell rang, Midoriya was reminded that something a little more important was right now. Lunch. And with his light breakfast, even a plain lunch was smelling delicious. Midoriya snapped his notebook shut with an air of punctuality, stepping out of his chair while kicking his bags up and catching them midair, a trick he practiced for hours with swords. Turns out he could do that trick with a lot more than just swords. Midoriya shouldered his bags, tossing the notebook into his book bag and heading for the door quickly. Across the room Eiko snapped out of sleep, glancing around for a second before barreling across the room in a rush after the greenette. They met in the hallway, exchanged brief and awkward greetings, then went into the room to eat. The eating only lasted for a few minutes though as they slowed down and instead started talking. The talking wasn't about anything important, just little things like what they'd be doing in the coming week. Eiko was about to finish catching up on her homework and then she'd no longer behind, but she still had more work to do before the year ended. She was only halfway through the year after all, but she at least was caught up on most of the work that she should have learned well before she stepped into a high school. Midoriya, meanwhile, didn't have much to say as usual. He was content to sit back and listen, only voicing his thoughts when asked. He didn't have any work in class left, and his life in the fast lane wasn't much of a conversational piece. Talking about his after-school job was a little too much for Eiko in his mind. Still, he did have something to talk about. I'm going to be leaving after lunch. Midoriya finished his bento, setting it down on the table with an air of finality. It should only be for about a week, but I'll still be here in for mornings through lunch. After that though, I'm not gonna be here for club activities. Oh, alright. Eiko glanced down at her lunch, nodding a few times to nothing in particular before her gaze returned to him while she fiddled with the last of her food. Is it for something bad? Hopefully not. I should just be working out some small stuff, little issues. Midoriya dropped his chopsticks into the box then closed the lid, pressing down on all sides to make sure it's sealed. But if you need any help you can always ask. It's like I'm doing a lot in classes anymore. Great. Eiko's mood was lifted a lot just by that, smiling and nodding a few more times before she stopped to take another bite of food. Since she'd been doing most of the talking, she didn't finish as fast as Midoriya and still had some left. Tea then. You start today. Hope so. A lot of hope so far but not a lot of surety. He could only know for sure once they met up in person and talked about it, but until then, a lot of things were left up to chance. Revenant hated it. Still, statistically, the big man was pretty likely to agree, if just for a chance to kick the shit out of him then laugh about it. Alright, H have a good time and G good luck. Eiko snapped her own bento shut while he'd been monologuing in his own head, a little reminder to get his head in the game as they both stood. Eiko gave him a smaller, more nervous smile. Midoriya returned the smile with his own and a lot more confidence, seeing her off from the classroom. Thanks, Eiko. You too. Those were pretty lame words to send someone off with, but Midoriya wasn't big on talking. Wasn't even the last time they'd talked this week. Instead of focusing on his brain-dead word choice and all the better things he could have said, Midoriya waved goodbye to her for an extra second before getting down to brass tacks and slamming the door shut, wiping the fake smile off his face while he locked the door shut. He swept through the room in record time, pulling out some hidden items and tossing them into his training bag before he changed clothes. His school uniform got replaced with loose baggy clothes, the uniform shoved away inside his book bag. He checked his things, flipped his hood up, and jumped out the window, sneaking his way out of the school. He covered ground quickly, cutting across town with a mix of alleyways and side paths as he left the rundown section of town and entered a more lively section, filled with less ruined buildings and more little businesses. It had been a while since he took this route, it had been a long while. Last time he had was right before his Yakuza Hunter phase, and the less thought about that cringy phase the better. Still, edgy phases aside, Midoriya was pretty familiar with the route. He used to come this way with packages all the time, so running with his school bags wasn't much harder. Except for the summer heat. That was new. He had the good sense not to be wearing a ton of layers in the summer, sure, but since he didn't want to be recognized he had to keep his body covered and that meant his hoodie stayed over his head. He might have unzipped the thing, but either way, he was sweating buckets. The summer sun plus his disguise, a faded all-might hoodie, wasn't a great combination. It was just after the peak of summer and just after high noon, so the day was hot and still getting hotter. Maybe that's why Midoriya felt like dying by the time he arrived at his destination, an old putt-putt course. You really picked this stupid place. Midoriya stuck to his disguise and didn't remove his hoodie, but he did lift his shirt to try and let off some heat. He slowed to a stop underneath some shade, leaning against the wall and fumbling for a water bottle already before he even started training. Seriously, why this place? Is this some sort of official meeting place for criminals and dipshits? Probably, your air. The thick American accent combined with ample confidence was enough to pick the man out of a crowd alone, but the voice was just as distinct and large as the main man himself. He was massive, bigger just sitting on his motorcycle than Midoriya was standing. He didn't bother wearing a shirt, sticking his chest out with confidence and showing off his 4-star tattoos. His bronze skin and pearly smile glinted so much in the sun Midoriya had trouble just looking in the giant dumbass. Was up, Sendy tilde pay tilde dir tilde. Ah, this fucking heat that's what's up. Midoriya gave up disguises and ditched both bags and hoodie, pouring some of his water on his head to try and cool off before he refocused. But seriously, why are we meeting at this golf course? I get that I met bartender here, but why you? While Midoriya stumbled over how to mention Kurogiri without saying his name, Mao took it all in stride, laughing again. You done backquote get it, genius. Da big man tall backquote as if we needed ya to post stuff over air. This golf course had acted as the in-between for Ronin and All for One back when Ronin was making possessed items, but if you thought about it, it was pretty unlikely that All for One himself was the one who posted or picked up stuff at the golf course for Ronin. Midoriya always assumed Kurogiri was the one to post the messages since he'd known and worked with the bartender the longest, but Kurogiri was a member of the League of Villains and kind of famous. Thinking about it logically, there were probably at least 3 people who got All for One's messages to Ronin. Problem was Midoriya was too hot to think logically, and WAAAY too hot to care. Whatever. So, I wanted to talk to you about some stuff. Are we really gonna talk in this parking lot, cause I'm baking to death? Midoriya reflected that he really didn't plan this too well because, even without the hoodie, he was still really hot. It was like over 100 degrees, he really should have checked the weather last night. As funny as this is, Melty Peter, nah. Hop on, we gonna make tracks. Mel made up newer and even dumber nicknames without even batting an eye, moving from his sitting position into a driving position on his bike and making room for the vigilante. Midoriya rolled his eyes, picking back up his things before climbing on. So, where are we going? Y'all find out when we get dear Tilda. Military place again, got it. Mao glanced back, scoffing as he revved the engine but unable to hide his pearly smile. Dick. Chapter end notes. Yo, so, joke's on you, I'm not dead. Can't even die right, so get nay nod. Man, this took so long to write. I wrote it with no energy, edited with no energy, then came back with some energy and rewrote the whole thing. I'd say my bad but I'm much too pretentious to own up to stuff like that. So, stuff in this actual chapter. Eiko's is still somehow the hardest part of this entire fanfic, that's gotta be worth something. I don't know how in writing a superhero story about people in a different country with an entirely different culture, one teenage girl is so difficult to write. It's seriously amazing. Other stuff, Ishimi High School. Ishimi's judo club got center stage last training arc. I wanted to keep the audience up to date with stuff going on in Midoriya's life outside of his vigilantism so we don't forget it. Plus, we might be focusing on the school a little more soon. Fun to look forward to if I don't take half a century to get to it. Finally, the main man. This next arc's gonna have a lot of Mao and that's probably mostly for me. Mao is my favorite character in this mess, obviously, so this is just an excuse to put him in more stuff. He's my favorite character since he's so easy to write and always having fun. Well, that's all for now. Time to disappear for 2 more centuries until my Dr. Pepper supply is refreshed and I write another chapter. Adios. Chapter 166. Chapter summary. A nice and definitely relaxing training sequence. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya's chest heaved as he crashed into and bounced off the ground, rolling across the grass to a stop several feet away. He only stopped to spit out the dirt and blood in his mouth before he got his hands and feet underneath him and rose back into a guard, ready to keep going. Yaju want some trainin'? Really? That's it. Mao glanced back at Midoriya in a mix of surprise tinged with a touch of confusion. He barely paid any attention to the road, doubling the speed limit as he nearly killed them both for the 3rd time since they left the golf course. I think so red light dipshit. Midoriya smacked Mao upside his head as they finally slowed to a stop before they crashed into a large truck driving across the road, blocking their path. Say what you would about Mao, but even crashing face first into a supply truck would cause the main man some trouble even if only financially. What ya complaining about? Ya ain't dead yet. And that's a miracle. Midoriya eased back in the motorcycle, taking this little moment to relax his grip on Mao. He would have worn his bodysuit and helmet if he remembered how wild Mao's driving was. His arms were getting sore just holding on. But Zhu Trainin. Mao kicked off the ground as the light changed and hit the gas, skipping into oncoming traffic just to pass a car that wasn't going fast enough for him. Midoriya could have touched the cars in oncoming traffic if he stuck his arm out. Why me? You're the only guy the first actually know who knows martial arts like really knows it. Midoriya sprang up from the ground into a defensive position, jumping up and straight into Mao's next punch. All of Midoriya's own momentum was turned against him by Mao's attack, sending the vigilante stumbling back and off balance with one well-placed attack. Midoriya staggered back one last step, raising his arms to put a guard back up so he could survive a little longer. Opposed to him, Mao stepped forward with practiced ease, ready to continue on the offense. Guess you're right. Mao scratched his head as he took his eyes off the road again, thinking back. Not a lot of heroes or villains really know their way around a proper fight these days. You'd think they'd learn a little. I mean, I only learned that shit cause I was so weak. Wait, what? Midoriya zoned out, for a second, thinking he misheard the giant. Mao, what the fuck are you talking about? Surprised, Mao had a loud and hearty laugh, smirking as he glanced back at Midoriya. Swerving car. What's that mean, AY? Learn to drive, asshole. Mao reacted quickly to a car that nearly crashed into them, swerving into oncoming traffic to pass the car while flipping the driver off. He took one extra second to flip off the driver before he refocused on the road and his own ramblings. But I'm not as strong as you think. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise, to be honest. Ya dumbass. Midoriya looked at Mao like he was crazy. Well, Mao is definitely crazy, but this might take the cake. You can survive getting flayed, fall off buildings, and can punch through metal. What are you talking about? Ya don't get it. Ah, shit. Mao took another chance to glance back at his passenger then swerved, correcting before they crashed by kicking off the wall they would have crashed into. I'm not talking durability, dipshit. I'm talking about Mao quirk, man. Let me explain. Mao's jabs rattled Midoriya's defenses with each punch. Midoriya held his arms up in front of his head, but his arm stung with every strike. Every hit pushed him back, forcing the vigilante backward step by step. Mao's jab sliced through the air like Midoriya's sword, displaying an insane amount of speed. A sword could be moved that fast because of various physics and how levers worked, meaning the tip moved a lot faster than the handle. Mao, however, didn't need tricks like swords. His jabs weren't textbook, they were beyond it. His arm slid behind his punches as he leaned into his attacks, putting weight into every shot as he punched right through Midoriya's every attempt to defend. Ma quirk's name is Hype. Ya know some basic shit already, but I didn't give ya da details yet. Mao didn't look back now, focusing on the road. He could at least monologue seriously, it seemed. Still, this was kind of important, so Midoriya would save the jokes about monologues for later. Ma quirk makes my body really resistant to everything and anything, man. Real simple sheet, like the more excited I get the tougher I get, ya get me. Mao threw it to Midoriya to make sure the vigilante was still listening and following along, turning his head slightly without looking backward for once. But that's not all it is, right? Midoriya wasn't sure how this conversation would eventually lead to how Mao was weak, but he could tell what Mao wanted him to say and was content to play along. Ya get it, ya might want to put something on your face case the popo right up. Mao accelerated as they left the city properly, driving off the proper road to pass more people, going from double the speed limit to nearly triple. He weaved through the few cars on the road with practiced ease, getting right back into what he was saying like this was his natural environment. Hype makes Ma body resist everything, not just physical. Don't age. Don't get hungry. Hell, took 70 years just to get this tan, and I spent 30 of those in Australia. Mao held up one of his hands and laughed, thinking back on the past for a moment. Hell, I'm even resistant to quirks if I get enough hype. Midoriya didn't just sit back and take hits, or at least, he wasn't trying to. His feet were constantly working, pulling him back and away from the onslaught of punches and diffusing some of the weight. He was at least having the power of Mao's punches with his sudden moves. But Mao's punches, like the main man himself, didn't seem to care they were getting weakened. With one hand Mao tore Midoriya's guard open, launching the vigilante's arms apart with every strike before Midoriya's guard finally broke. Midoriya didn't just sit back though, the second his guard was down he covered for it by attacking. His feet slid back to anchor him in place so he could push forward. Midoriya lunged towards Mao, getting too close to be properly kicked while Mao was still pulling back from his last punch. Midoriya drew his right hand to his face as a guard while he twisted his body at the hips and shot his right at Mao's exposed midsection. Mao's guard was wide open for an attack, and the main man was too dedicated to his last punch to suddenly switch to a block or dodge. Midoriya's hand whipped through the air and shot towards his target. But, you noticed what Ma quirk doesn't do. Mao glanced back as the police turned on their lights and began to speed up, trying to chase the speeding devils. Mao and Midoriya, more aptly by their masks, random biker and psycho exchanged glances before the biker chuckled, slowing a little just to let the cop catch up. Someone was clearly enjoying this. Midoriya looked back, adjusting the white cloth wrapping his head so he could better see what was happening. Your quirk. What it doesn't do. What's with that phrasing, could you make it a little more vague? It almost makes sense. Probably could. What the hell is that popo doing? They're slow as food till the UCK. Mao checked his rearview mirror and then blinked, adjusting it as the second police car rounded the corner. Well, shit, hold on. Isn't this military base thing supposed to be a secret? Are you trying to draw attention? Why not? Could be fun. Mao gunned the engine and began to rapidly accelerate, laughing all the way. Ya gonna guess what my quirk don't do, or ya give up? What your quirk doesn't do? Midoriya glanced at the police behind them and tried to think through what Mao said. What a quirk didn't do? That was a ton of things. Mao couldn't fly, Mao couldn't shoot lasers out of his eyes. But Mao was probably talking about something that you'd expect Mao to be able to do. Revenant thought it through, focusing on what he'd seen Mao do. And then coming to a sudden realization. Strength. You don't have super strength. Midoriya's punch was perfect. You could have written a book about that one jab. The speed, the weight, the way it flicked up underneath Mao's guard. Beautiful. But perfect wasn't good enough. Mao's eyes shifted down, barely even registering Midoriya's attack. Then, in the instant before Midoriya's own punch landed, a thunderbolt hit Midoriya straight in the skull. A right hand descended from on high and slammed into Midoriya with Mao's full weight and strength behind it, no, with even more than Mao's own strength. Midoriya's own power was put into this attack, his own efforts increasing the power he got hit with. Midoriya's punch was as perfect as he could get, sure, but that perfect was sloppy in comparison to Mao's single counter, a punch backed by the strength and experience of a century of fighting. Midoriya could see the punch coming but couldn't do a damn thing as he was launched backward, stumbling and dazed, before his legs gave out from underneath him and he collapsed to the ground, defeated. And only 12 seconds into the first spar. Mao could do a lot of incredible things. Lift a giant motorcycle, punch through walls, and take punishment like a madman. It was incredibly likely that he could do more, but Midoriya was focusing on what he knew. And what he did know was that Mao was an 8-foot-tall giant and was likely naturally pretty strong. But he had never done anything superhumanly strong, or at least, not for his size. Sure, Mao's motorcycle weighed at least half a ton, but the main man was huge and kept fit. His strength was impressive, incredible even, but, for someone 8 feet tall, you don't have super strength. I knew ya could get it centipeter. Mao lightly hit Midoriya in the shoulder then swerved around the police car, using his hand like a knife and piercing the tire. Rubber met steel like skin and something had to give, resulting in one police car taking a dive off the road. My quirk makes me durable as fuck, but it don't make me stronger. I'm as tough as a hammer, but I gotta put in the work to make sure that hammer hits hard. The other police car pulled over, giving up the chase to instead help the disabled car. It seemed that out in the countryside, with no heroes, the police simply couldn't be bothered to put up much of a fight. At least there wasn't any major harm done to the officers unless you count the punctured tire. I learned martial arts and sheets so I could do some real damage, Mao continued, shaking his hand to get a few strands of tire rubber off. So dad I didn't take hits, so I could give M2. Alright, that makes sense so far. I think. Midoriya thought through it all and could agree with that. If you were durable without being strong, you were a punching bag. Plus, being extra durable, you could get stronger than the average human without hurting yourself. All in all, Mao was above the average civilian and hero in pure physical strength, but that wasn't directly an effect of Mao's quirk. But why are you telling me this? Isn't it stupid to tell me what your quirk does? Midoriya at least understood what Mao was talking about earlier when he said he was weak, but he had no clue why Mao would tell him all this. It seemed like this might come around to bite Mao in the ass someday. Ha, please. Mao laughed, shaking his head before turning to give Midoriya one last look. Why shouldn't I tell ya what my quirk does? 'Cause it's a bad idea. Ha, so what? Mao turned back to the road, taking off his motorcycle helmet and letting the wind flow through his hair. I can tell ya my quirk 'cause I'm strong. It's the right of the strong to do what they want because they can. I wanna tell ya, so I do. Simple as that. I tilde. Mao stood over Midoriya, hands on his hips. He nudged the boy with a foot, very confused. Did I hit ya too hard? Sheet, ya did what better last time we brawled. Mao was wearing a large boxing glove on each hand to cushion his punches, and to make sure he didn't accidentally activate his quirk and hit Midoriya in the skull with a fist as hard as steel. Opposite the main man Midoriya had been wearing the proper head